London had never known fog like this. It rolled through the East End streets, thick as congealed blood, swallowing street lamps whole and muffling the city's heartbeat to a diseased whisper. Eric Brooks, blade to those who knew what hunted in the dark, materialized from that fog like a judge stepping into a condemned world. His long leather coat was torn at the shoulder, still smoking from whatever dimensional fire had thrown him across realities. The silver-edged sword on his back hummed with residual energy. His dark glasses reflected nothing but gray emptiness. This wasn't New York. The architecture was wrong, the smell was wrong, and the presence saturating the night air made every nerve in his body scream warnings his conscious mind hadn't yet processed. Blade's hand moved to his shoulder holster, his fingers brushing the modified Beretta loaded with silver hollow points. 53 vampires he'd put down in the past month. The sorcerer trying to breach dimensional barriers made 54, right before his spell had catastrophically succeeded in ways he hadn't intended. Now Blade stood in an alley that reeked of old death and fresh terror, and his vampire senses, the curse he'd spent a lifetime suppressing, whispered that he was no longer the apex predator. Something was watching him, not the frightened humans hurrying past the alley's mouth, clutching umbrellas against rain that hadn't yet fallen. Not the feral thing feeding in the shadows 3 blocks east. He'd deal with that soon enough. Something older. Something that made the vampire blood in his veins want to simultaneously bow in reverence and flee screaming. D-Blade's jaw tightened. He bowed to nothing, least of all monsters. The scream came from the direction he'd already identified. A woman's voice cut short with surgical precision. Blade moved, his enhanced speed carrying him across the rooftops with predatory grace. Below, in a courtyard behind what looked like a closed butcher's shop, a pale figure in Victorian dress held a young woman against a wall. The vampire, and there was no mistaking what it was, had already opened her throat. Blood ran in arteries down pale flesh. Blade dropped between them like the sword of God. His boot caught the vampire in the chest, sending it sprawling. The woman collapsed, clutching her neck, eyes wide with shock that would kill her before blood loss did. Blade didn't have time for mercy. He drew his sword in one fluid motion, the blade singing as it cleared the sheath, and advanced on the vampire as it scrambled backward. "Please," it hissed, all pretense of humanity abandoned. "Please, I didn't know she was protected. I'll leave London." "You'll leave existence," Blade said, and took its head. The body crumbled to ash with gratifying speed. Different physics, same result. "Good." Blade turned to the woman, already reaching for the emergency coagulant in his coat, when he felt it again. That presence, closer now, amused. "How disappointingly efficient," a voice said from everywhere and nowhere. "I was hoping for more of a show." Blade spun, sword raised, and found himself facing a man in a red coat and wide-brimmed hat. Except man was the wrong word entirely. Every instinct Blade possessed screamed vampire with such intensity his hand actually trembled. The first time in 15 years. The figure smiled, revealing teeth that belonged in nightmares. A hunter who smells of the very thing he hunts. How deliciously contradictory. "Step into the light," Blade commanded, though there was precious little light to be found. "I think not. This shadow suits me." The vampire, because that's what it absolutely was, tilted its head. "You're not from here. Your scent is foreign. Dimensional displacement, perhaps. How fascinating. The last time something tore through reality into London, it was considerably less composed." Blade's response was to draw his Beretta and fire 3 silver rounds directly at the creature's heart. The vampire didn't dodge. The bullets hit, punched through the red coat, and the creature looked down at the holes with something approaching delight. Silver. How traditional. It raised its head, and Blade saw eyes the color of fresh arterial spray. "But I'm afraid you've made a tactical error, Hunter. You've just confirmed you're dangerous." The vampire moved. Blade had fought hundreds of undead. He'd matched speed with elder vampires who'd walked the earth for centuries. He was prepared for superhuman velocity, for strength that could tear steel, for the savage cunning of apex predators. He wasn't prepared for this. The red-coated vampire crossed 20 feet in a blink, moving not with speed, but with the impossible fluidity of something that existed slightly outside conventional physics. Blade brought his sword up in a block that should have intercepted the attack. Instead, he found himself slammed against a wall hard enough to crack brick, a white-gloved hand around his throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. "Let's see what you are," the vampire purred, and Blade felt something probe at him. Not physical, but an invasive pressure against his very essence. Oh, you're both and neither. The hunger of a vampire, the heart of a human hunter. You've built your entire existence on self-hatred, haven't you? How delightfully tragic." Blade drove his knee into the creature's ribs with enough force to shatter concrete. The vampire's smile never wavered, but it did release him. Blade landed in a crouch, sword ready, every muscle coiled. "I don't know what you are," Blade said quietly, "but you're a vampire. That's all I need to know." "Am I?" The creature laughed, a sound like coffin nails scraping stone. "Yeah, I am Alucard, servant of the Hellsing organization, protector of the Protestant Church and the people of England. And yes, vampire. The vampire, if we're being historically accurate." It spread its arms wide. "So tell me, Daywalker, will you slay the monster who guards the humans from other monsters? Where does that fit in your moral calculus?" Blade's finger tightened on the trigger. A vampire claiming to protect humans. He'd heard similar lies from creatures trying to justify their existence, trying to pretend their nature could be contained or redeemed. It always ended the same way, with innocent blood spilled. "There's no such thing as a good vampire," Blade said. "Then you must loathe yourself terribly," Alucard replied. Before Blade could respond, 3 armored trucks screamed into the courtyard, these soldiers in black combat gear pouring out with military precision. They took positions around the perimeter, weapons trained not on Alucard, but on Blade himself. A woman emerged from the lead vehicle, blonde, 30s, wearing glasses and a business suit that somehow looked more dangerous than tactical gear. She surveyed the scene with cool calculation. The ash pile, the dying woman, Blade and Alucard facing each other in the center, and her expression never changed. "Alucard," she said crisply. "Report." "Found a stray, Master," Alucard said, never taking his eyes off Blade. "He kills vampires. Rather good at it too, though his manners need work." The woman's gaze shifted to Blade, and he felt himself being evaluated with the same clinical precision he used when hunting. "I am Sir Integra Fairbrook Wingate's Hellsing. Once you're standing in my jurisdiction, carrying weapons in my city, and interfering with my operations. You have 30 seconds to explain yourself before I have you detained." Blade looked at the soldiers, at the woman who commanded them, at the vampire who apparently served her. None of this made sense, but one thing was clear. He'd fallen into a world where the rules of engagement were very, very different. "Name's Blade," he said finally, "and I hunt vampires. All of them." Integra's eyes narrowed slightly. "All of them?" "All of them," Blade confirmed, his gaze sliding deliberately to Alucard. The vampire's grin widened until it was no longer remotely human. "Oh, Master, can we keep him? I haven't had a proper challenge in decades. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below." Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. Integra Hellsing studied the strange hunter before her, taking in the weapons, the bearing, the barely suppressed violence, and made a decision that would change the course of her organization's future. "Lower your weapons," she commanded her soldiers. "Mr. Blade, you and I need to have a conversation, one that will determine whether you leave London alive, in chains, or in pieces." She turned toward her vehicle. "Alucard, ensure our guest cooperates." "With pleasure, Master," Alucard said, and Blade realized he'd just entered a game whose rules he didn't understand, played by pieces that shouldn't exist. The fog closed in tighter, and somewhere in the distance, something howled. Hellsing Manor rose from the English countryside like a Gothic accusation, all stone and shadow, and centuries of blood-soaked history. Blade sat in the armored transport, flanked by soldiers who kept their weapons ready but not aimed, a professional courtesy that spoke of extensive combat experience. He'd allowed himself to be escorted because the alternative was fighting through 24 trained operatives, and whatever the hell Alucard actually was. And tactical retreat wasn't the same as surrender. Besides, he needed information. This world operated on different rules, and ignorance got hunters killed. Alucard sat across from him, lounging with the casual arrogance of something that had nothing left to fear. The vampire hadn't stopped smiling since the courtyard. "So you're wondering if you can kill me," he said conversationally. "The answer is yes, theoretically. But you'd have to destroy every drop of blood, every cell, every echoing memory of my existence. 3,424,867 souls currently reside within me. Daywalker, how many stakes did you bring?" Blade's expression didn't change behind his dark glasses. "Enough. I like him, Master," Alucard called toward the front of the transport where Integra sat reviewing documents. "He has the conviction of the truly doomed." "Quiet, Alucard," Integra said without looking up. "Mr. Blade, when we arrive, you'll be escorted to a holding room while I verify your story. You claim to hunt vampires. I need to know if you're an asset or a threat to my operations." "Your operations involve keeping a vampire as a pet," Blade said flatly. "That tells me everything I need to know about your judgment." The soldiers tensed. Alucard's grin widened impossibly further. Integra finally looked up, and Blade saw something in her eyes that reminded him of every hardened general who'd ever sent soldiers into hell and lost sleep over it afterward. "Alucard isn't a pet, Mr. Blade. He's a weapon, one I inherited from my father, who inherited command from his father, stretching back 4 centuries. The Hellsing family exists for one purpose: to protect England from supernatural threats. Sometimes that requires employing monsters to fight monsters." She closed her folder with finality. "I don't expect you to approve. I don't particularly care if you approve. But if you intend to operate in my country, you'll understand the hierarchy, or I'll have Alucard demonstrate it to you in ways that will make your dimensional displacement seem pleasant." Blade studied her. Committed, intelligent, dangerous, and absolutely serious about using a vampire as her primary weapon. In his world, that kind of compromise always ended in disaster. Always. He'd seen too many organizations try to control the undead, thinking they could point fangs at their enemies and remain unbitten. "How long have you commanded him?" Blade asked. 12 years, Integra replied. "And in those 12 years, how many has he killed?" "Thousands of vampires, ghouls, other supernatural entities that threaten civilian populations." Integra's gaze never wavered. 40 humans under my watch." "That you know of," Blade countered. Alucard laughed, a sound like wind through a crypt. "Oh, he's not wrong, Master. I've had the occasional snack when you weren't looking." The vampire's eyes gleamed with malice. "I jest, of course. My master's leash is quite short, and I am a very obedient dog." The transport pulled through iron gates that looked capable of stopping a tank assault. Blade cataloged defenses automatically. Walls, guard towers, clear fields of fire, and something else. Wards, maybe. He could feel a pressure against his supernatural senses, like walking through static electricity. "Your manor is warded," he observed. "Against supernatural intrusion, yes," Integra confirmed. "My ancestors were thorough. Every stone blessed, every entrance sanctified, in every room prepared to become a killing ground if necessary. Alucard can only enter where I grant him permission. The same will apply to you." "I'm not a vampire." "No," Integra agreed, "but you're not entirely human either, are you?" Blade said nothing. The transport stopped in a cobblestone courtyard where more soldiers waited, along with a tall man in butler's attire who looked like he'd fought in actual wars. The rear doors opened, and Blade stepped out into cold English air that smelled of old money and older violence. "This way," Integra commanded, and Blade followed her through oak doors thick enough to stop bullets, down corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced Englishmen and women who all shared the same ice-blue eyes. Alucard drifted behind them like a red-coated shadow, humming something that might have been Wagner. They entered a study that looked like it had been transplanted from the Victorian era. Dark wood, leather chairs, walls lined with books and weapons in equal measure. A silver cross dominated one wall, large enough to be used as an actual weapon. Blade noted it was genuine silver. He could smell the purity. Integra settled behind a massive desk and gestured to a chair. Blade remained standing. "Suit yourself," she said, lighting a small cigar with practiced ease. "Now, tell me how you came to be in London and what exactly you are." Blade had no reason to trust these people, but he needed allies in this world, or at least needed to understand the playing field before making enemies. "I'm a vampire hunter," he began. "In my world, vampires are parasites. They spread through blood transmission, create ghouls, and prey on humans. I hunt them. I kill them. All of them." "And your nature," Integra pressed. "Alucard detected something hybrid about you. My mother was bitten while pregnant with me. I got the vampire strengths without the weaknesses. I can walk in daylight. I age slowly. I'm stronger and faster than humans." Blade's jaw tightened. "And I have the thirst. I suppress it with serum, but it's always there." Alucard tilted his head, studying Blade like a fascinating specimen. "A dhampir. How positively medieval. Tell me, Daywalker, do you hate what you are? Do you lie awake wondering if you're hunting vampires to save humans, or hunting them out of jealousy for creatures who've embraced what you deny?" Blade's hand moved toward his weapon. Every soldier in the room responded, rifles raised. Integra raised one hand, freezing the tableau. "Alucard, well, that's enough," she said quietly. Then to Blade, "He antagonizes everyone. It's his nature. Don't take it personally." "Everything I do is personal," Alucard purred. "It's what makes eternal existence bearable." Integra ignored him. "Mr. Blade, I believe your arrival is connected to increased supernatural activity we've been tracking. Someone or something is conducting experiments with dimensional barriers. We've detected 3 breaches in the past month, though you're the first living thing to come through intact." "Who?" Blade asked. "That's what we're trying to determine, which brings me to my proposition." Integra leaned forward, cigar smoke curling around her face. "You need to understand this world's vampire hierarchy. You need resources, intelligence, and someone who knows London's supernatural landscape. I need someone with your particular skills to investigate these breaches without drawing attention from our competitors." "Competitors? The Vatican has their own monster hunters," Integra said dryly. "Section 13 Iscariot organization, led by Father Alexander Anderson, who makes your anti-vampire zealotry look positively moderate. Then there are the various vampire organizations we're tracking, some old, some disturbingly new and militaristic." Blade processed this. Multiple factions, complex politics, and apparently the Catholic Church had armed vampire hunters who made him look moderate. He'd ask about that later. "You're offering cooperation," he said. "I'm offering a temporary alliance. You help us identify and stop whoever is tearing holes in reality. We provide you with resources and information to operate in this world. When the job is complete, we'll discuss long-term arrangements." Integra's eyes were hard. "But understand this. While you're in England, you do not harm Alucard or any member of my organization. That includes Saras Victoria, my other vampire operative." "You have 2 vampires," Blade said flatly. "Saras was turned in the line of duty. She's learning control under Alucard's supervision." Integra's tone made it clear this was non-negotiable. "She's one of my soldiers. You touch her, and I'll have you executed." Blade stared at Integra, at the vampire lounging behind her chair, at the impossible situation he'd been thrown into. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to reject any alliance with monsters. But he was trapped in a foreign dimension with unknown threats and no resources. A tactical pragmatism warred with fundamental principle. "I work alone," he said finally. "Not here you don't," Integra replied. "Accept my terms or spend your time in this world, running from both Hellsing and Iscariot while trying to navigate supernatural politics you don't understand. Your choice." Alucard's grin had returned to something approaching human. "Say yes, Daywalker. It will be so much more entertaining if you're allowed to play in our theater." Blade looked at the vampire, really looked at him. Saw something ancient and terrible wearing human form like an ill-fitting coat. Saw amusement and madness and a vast echoing hunger that had been temporarily chained but never truly satisfied. This thing served Integra through some kind of binding, but Blade had seen enough magical compulsions to know they could be broken. When? Not if, but he needed answers. needed to understand why he'd been pulled into this world, and needed to find a way home. "Temporary alliance," Blade said, "but if your pet steps out of line, then I'll destroy him myself," Inagra interrupted, "as is my right and responsibility. We understand each other?" Blade gave a curt nod. "Excellent." Inagra pressed a button on her desk. "Walter, please escort Mr. Blade to the guest quarters. Alucard, return to your quarters. We'll reconvene tomorrow evening for operational briefing." "As you command, Master," Alucard said, and dissolved into shadow and red mist, his laughter echoing in the walls themselves. The butler who entered moved with military precision despite his age. "This way, sir," he said to Blade with impeccable courtesy. As Blade followed Walter through Hellsing Manor's corridors, he calculated odds, assessed threats, and planned contingencies. He'd accepted the alliance, but he hadn't promised to trust them, and somewhere in the building's lower levels, he could feel Alucard watching him through the darkness, still smiling. The guest quarters were surprisingly well appointed. A bedroom with actual furniture instead of a cell, an adjacent bathroom, and windows that weren't barred but were certainly reinforced. Blade tested them anyway. Bulletproof glass, blessed silver wire woven into the frames. The door locked from the outside, but he'd expected that. Walter had been polite but clear. He was a guest with boundaries. Blade set his weapons on the desk with careful precision. The sword still humming faintly with residual dimensional energy. 2 Berettas modified for silver ammunition. UV grenades. REDTA serum injectors designed to crystallize vampire blood. A wooden stake, old-fashioned but effective. Each tool represented years of refinement, countless hunts, and the fundamental truth that had guided his existence. Vampires were monsters, and monsters needed to die. Yet here he was, sleeping under the same roof as 2 of them. He pulled off his glasses and stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. Red-tinged eyes stared back, the vampire blood always visible there, no matter how much serum he pumped into his system. His mother's curse, his father's legacy, the thing that made him the perfect hunter, and the thing he hated most about himself. "You've built your entire existence on self-hatred," Alucard had said. The vampire wasn't wrong. Blade splashed water on his face, then reached for his serum kit. The injector hissed as he pressed it against his neck, releasing the chemical cocktail that kept the thirst at bay. Temporary relief flooded his system. The hunger retreated to its familiar background static. He was loading his second Beretta when someone knocked. "Mr. Blade?" A young woman's voice, British accent, nervous. "Sir Integra sent me to brief you on house protocols." Blade opened the door to find a blonde girl in Hellsing military uniform, looking barely old enough to drink legally. Her eyes were blue, her posture military but uncertain, and she carried herself like someone still learning their body's capabilities. His vampire senses detected it immediately. The scent, the aura, the subtle wrongness of something undead wearing human skin. "You're the police girl," he said flatly. "Sarah's Victoria." She blinked, surprised. "How did you— oh, right. You can sense it." She shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, I was turned 3 months ago, during a mission in Cheddar. Alucard shot me to kill the vampire priest using me as a shield, then gave me a choice. Die human or live as a vampire." Her voice dropped. "I chose to live." Blade's hand rested on his holster, not drawing but ready. "And now you hunt your own kind." "I hunt the monsters who prey on innocence," Sarah's corrected, a trace of steel entering her voice. "Same as you from what I hear. Just, I do it while being one of them." She met his gaze directly. "You going to try to kill me, or can I do my job?" Blade studied her, saw genuine conflict in her eyes, not the predatory amusement he'd seen in Alucard. Saw someone struggling with transformation, not reveling in it. It reminded him uncomfortably of his own daily battle against nature. "Do your job," he said finally, stepping back to let her enter. Saras relaxed fractionally. "Right. So, house rules. The basement levels are off limits without escort. That's where Alucard sleeps. And trust me, you don't want to surprise him in his coffin. The armory is on sub-level 2 if you need to requisition ammunition. Walter handles all equipment requests. Meals are served in the dining hall, but I'm guessing you'll want to eat in your room." She paused. "Sir Integra wants you to know that tomorrow night we're investigating a vampire nest in Whitechapel. She's assigning you to the operation as a field test." "A test," Blade repeated, "to see if you can work with the team without—" Saris made a vague gesture that encompassed everything. The weapons, the tension, the fundamental incompatibility of their natures. "You know, incident. Will Alucard be there?" "Probably. He goes where Master Integra commands." Saris fidgeted with her uniform sleeve. "Look, I know what you're thinking. I can see it in your face. You think I'm a monster. You think Alucard's a monster. You're wondering why Sir Integra doesn't just destroy us and find human soldiers instead." "Yes," Blade said simply. Saras nodded as if she'd expected that answer. "Because some monsters are worse than others, Mr. Blade. Because the things we fight, the real monsters, they don't die when you shoot them with silver bullets or stake them through the heart. They're old, powerful, and they've had centuries to perfect their craft." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't ask for this, but now that I have these abilities, I can protect people I couldn't protect before. I can fight things that would slaughter normal soldiers. Isn't that worth something?" "Not if you lose your humanity in the process," Blade said. "Then I guess we're both walking that tightrope," Saris replied quietly. "You've got vampire blood. I've got vampire everything, but we're both still choosing to fight for the living. Doesn't that count for something?" Before Blade could respond, the lights flickered. Saris tensed immediately, her hand moving to her sidearm. "That's not normal," she whispered. Blade drew his Beretta in one smooth motion. "What's happening?" "Emergency signal. Something's breached the perimeter." Saris's eyes had gone red, vampire instincts activating. "We need to get to the command center, now." They ran through corridors suddenly alive with activity, and these soldiers moved with practiced efficiency toward defensive positions. Alarm klaxons wailed. Walter appeared from a side passage, carrying what looked like razor wire and moving with speed that belied his age. The command center was controlled chaos. Integra stood before a bank of monitors showing exterior camera feeds. Blade immediately saw the problem. Figures in black combat gear were rappelling over the outer walls, moving with military precision. But these weren't human soldiers. His vampire senses screamed wrong, wrong, wrong. "Ghouls," Integra said crisply. "At least 30, armed with military-grade weapons. Someone sent an assault force." She turned to Saris. "Get Alucard, now." Saris saluted and disappeared. Integra's gaze shifted to Blade. "Well, Mr. Blade, it seems your field test has come early. Are you ready to see what we face in this world?" Blade watched the monitors as the ghouls began breaching the manor's outer defenses. "What's different about these ghouls versus the ones in my world? These are fresh, organized. Someone's controlling them, which means there's a vampire master coordinating this attack." Integra's jaw tightened. "We've been tracking increased militarization among vampire factions. This is the first direct assault on Hellsing Manor in 15 years. One of the monitors exploded in static, then another. The ghouls were systematically eliminating surveillance. Gunfire echoed from somewhere in the manor's eastern wing. "They're inside," a soldier reported. Integra pressed a button on her desk. "All units, weapons free. Rules of engagement, headshots only. Maintain defensive perimeter. Protect the archives at all costs." She looked at Blade. "The archives contain 4 centuries of vampire intelligence. If they're after information, that's the target." "Or they're after your pet vampire," Blade said. "Alucard can't be destroyed by conventional means, but he can be contained, sealed, stolen." Integra's expression was grim, which would give someone control of the most powerful vampire in existence. The door slammed open. Alucard entered, his red coat billowing despite the lack of wind. His grin stretched wide enough to show every tooth. "Master, someone sent me playmates. How thoughtful." "Alucard, defensive posture," Integra commanded. "Protect the archives and identify whoever's commanding these ghouls. Take Blade with you." Both Blade and Alucard spoke simultaneously. "No." Integra's glare could have frozen hellfire. "Yeah, that wasn't a request. Blade needs to see what we face. Alucard, you're best equipped to keep him alive during the learning process. Go, Now. Alucard's grin turned predatory as he looked at Blade. Come along, Daywalker. Let me show you how we deal with home invaders in England. Blade wanted to refuse, wanted to operate independently, but more gunfire echoed through the corridors and tactical necessity overruled pride. He followed Alucard out of the command center, both of them moving toward the sound of combat. They encountered the first wave of ghouls in the grand hallway. Blade took in the details automatically. Gray skin, jerky movements, but carrying weapons with disturbing coordination. These weren't the mindless zombies he'd dealt with before. These were being actively controlled. Observe, Alucard said. Warren raised his enormous pistol, the Kasul, Blade would learn later, firing custom 13mm rounds. The vampire fired once. A ghoul's head exploded. He fired again. Another head gone. 5 shots, 5 confirmed kills, and Alucard was laughing. Blade moved in with clinical efficiency. His Beretta barked 3 times. Triple tap to center mass to drop targets, then precise headshots as they fell. The silver rounds burned ghoul flesh, but only destroying the brains stopped them permanently. He fought with the practiced grace of someone who'd done this thousands of times, each movement economical and lethal. Not bad, Alucard observed, casually decapitating 2 ghouls with his bare hand as they rushed him. But you fight like you're trying to prove something. To whom? Yourself. God? Watch the vampires you'll never be? Shut up and fight, Blade growled, driving a silver stake through a ghoul's eye socket. They pressed forward through the manor, leaving destroyed corpses in their wake. Blade had to admit, grudgingly, that Alucard was effective. The vampire moved through combat like a force of nature, laughing maniacally as he tore through enemies with supernatural strength that made Blade's enhanced abilities look pedestrian. Then they reached the archives and found the real threat. A man stood among the bookshelves wearing a priest's cassock and round glasses, surrounded by a dozen ghouls held back by his raised hand. He was tall, blonde, and radiated the kind of fervent zealotry Blade recognized from religious extremists in his own world. But this man also had something else. Regeneration scars visible on his hands, and an aura of divine power that made the air shimmer. Alucard, the man said in a thick Scottish accent, I heard Hellsing had acquired a new pet. Thought I'd come see for myself. His gaze shifted to Blade. And what's this? Another creature of the night pretending to serve the light? Father Anderson, Alucard said with mock courtesy. What a blessed surprise. Come to steal books or just practice your biblical vandalism. I've come to deliver a message from His Holiness Maxwell. Anderson pulled out a bayonet from beneath his cassock, then another and another, until he bristled with blessed blades. The Vatican is aware of the dimensional breaches. We know someone's bringing weapons into this world, and we know Hellsing's harboring whatever came through tonight. His eyes fixed on Blade with burning intensity. Tell me, creature, Jan, are ye a tool of Satan's armies? Or merely another abomination too stupid to know its place? Blade raised his weapon. I'm the guy who kills vampires, and if you're working with them, you're next. Anderson's smile was beatific and terrifying. Oh, I'm going to enjoy purifying you. The priest moved with impossible speed, regenerator abilities giving him superhuman reflexes, and suddenly Blade was fighting for his life against bayonets that burned with holy fire, while Alucard laughed and the manor shook with violence. Anderson's bayonets sang through the air like hymns sung in steel. Blade twisted aside from the first strike, felt blessed metal pass close enough to singe his coat, and returned fire with his Beretta. The silver rounds hit center mass, perfect grouping that should have dropped any target. Anderson barely flinched. Way the bullets punched through his cassock, drew blood, and then Blade watched in disbelief as the wounds closed. Not vampire regeneration, this was something else, something divine and terrifying in equal measure. Amen, Anderson whispered and lunged again. Blade met him with his sword, blade catching bayonet in a shower of sparks. The priest was strong, inhumanly so, and fought with the fervor of absolute faith. Each strike was meant to kill, to purify, to cleanse what he perceived as corruption. Blade recognized the zealotry because he'd lived it himself, just aimed at different targets. You smell of the grave, creature, Anderson hissed, pressing forward. "Blood of the damned runs in your veins. Yet you dare hunt the children of Cain? You're an abomination pretending at righteousness." "Takes one to know one," Blade shot back, or ducking under a bayonet meant to pin him to the wall. "What are you, priest? You're not human." "I am the Lord's instrument," Anderson roared and threw 3 bayonets simultaneously, purified through faith and science to destroy Satan's mockeries. Blade rolled behind a bookshelf as blessed blades embedded themselves in ancient wood. The Vatican had created their own enhanced hunters, regenerators, augmented through some combination of faith and biotechnology. It was brilliant and horrifying, and explained why Integra had seemed so concerned about competitors. Alucard watched from the sidelines, leaning against a reading table with his arms crossed, and that insufferable grin plastered across his face. "Aren't you going to help your temporary ally, Judas Priest?" he called to Anderson. "Stay out of this, monster," Anderson snapped. "Hadaroi, this is between me and the half-breed." "Oh, by all means, continue," Alucard said. "I haven't been this entertained since that business in Rio. Do tell me when you're planning to get serious, though." The Daywalker looks positively bored. Blade was anything but bored. He was calculating trajectories, assessing the priest's regeneration limits, and running through his arsenal. Silver didn't work effectively. Stakes would be useless against regeneration. UV grenades might slow him down, but righteous fury seemed to override normal biological responses. He needed to change tactics. Blade holstered his gun and drew a knife with his offhand. Twin blades now, fighting Anderson's bayonets with technique honed over decades. The archives became a dance floor of lethal intent, to 2 enhanced warriors testing each other's limits, while ancient texts documented similar violence from centuries past. "You fight well, demon spawn," Anderson acknowledged, breathing hard, the first sign he had limits. "But you're still filth, still an affront to God's plan. How many innocents have you consumed to maintain your cursed existence?" "None," Blade said flatly, parrying 2 bayonets and nearly taking the priest's throat with his counter. "I suppress the thirst. Control it. Use what I am to destroy what threatens humanity." "Control?" Anderson's laugh was harsh. "There's no controlling evil, only destroying it. You think you're different because you fight your nature? You're still damned. Still—" "Boring," Alucard interrupted, his voice suddenly devoid of amusement. Both combatants froze as the temperature in the archives dropped 10 degrees. The vampire pushed off from the table, his shadow expanding across the floor like spilled ink. "You know what I find tedious, Judas Priest? Religious fanatics who can't see past their own dogma. Here stands a creature who battles his nature every single day, who uses darkness to protect light, and you call him an abomination? How very Catholic of you." Anderson's face reddened with fury. "Don't you dare lecture me about—" The explosion cut him off. Somewhere in the manor's eastern wing, something detonated with enough force to shake the foundation. Plaster dust rained from the ceiling. Alarms shrieked different patterns, chemical breach warnings. Alucard's expression went predatory. "Master," he said to no one visible, and you're clearly communicating through some link Blade didn't understand. "I know. Going now." He looked at Anderson. "Your little distraction has run its course, priest. Take your ghouls and go, or I'll forget Master's prohibition on killing Vatican operatives." "This isn't over," Anderson promised, gathering his bayonets with disturbing speed. "Creature," he said to Blade, "when next we meet, I'll show you the mercy of purification. Amen." He moved toward the archive's entrance, ghouls falling into formation around him. Blade started to pursue. Alucard's hand shot out, gripping his shoulder with crushing strength. "Let him go. He attacked us. He provided cover for the real assault," Alucard said, already moving toward the explosion site. "Someone used Iscariot's raid to mask their actual objective. Come, Daywalker. And our time for your education to continue." They ran through smoke-filled corridors, past Hellsing soldiers establishing perimeter control, and medical teams treating wounded. The eastern wing's security door had been blown inward, melted steel still glowing orange. Beyond it, Blade saw something that made his hunter instincts scream warnings. The room was a laboratory, medical equipment, containment cells, research stations. And in the center, surrounded by dead Hellsing soldiers, stood a man in a white uniform who radiated power that made Blade's vampire senses recoil. He was tall, pale, with silver hair and eyes that reflected light like a cat's. His SS uniform was immaculate, despite the carnage surrounding him, and he held a canister marked with biohazard symbols and Hellsing seal. "Guten Abend," the man said pleasantly. "You must be the dimensional anomaly. How fortuitous. I am the captain of the Millennium Organization, and you've just made our research significantly more interesting." Alucard's guns were out instantly, both the Kasul and its twin, the Jackal. "Captain," he said, voice gone cold and dangerous, "you're in my master's home. That's terminally unwise." "Is it?" The captain smiled. "Your master has something we want. Information on dimensional breach technology, blood samples from her new acquisition." His gaze fixed on Blade with clinical interest. "A hybrid from another reality. Tell me, Daywalker, how does your serum work? What allows you to suppress vampiric nature so effectively?" Blade's blood ran cold. They knew. Whoever these Millennium people were, they'd analyzed him, researched him. Aaron decided his biochemistry was worth stealing. "You're not taking anything," Blade said, weapons ready. The captain's smile never wavered. "I already have." He held up the canister. "Blood samples, serum analysis, enough data to replicate your condition in our own specimens. The Major will be so pleased." Alucard fired. Both guns, full auto, 13mm rounds that could punch through tank armor. The captain moved, not with vampire speed or regenerator reflexes, but with something else entirely. He was simply not where the bullets arrived, as if he could sense trajectory and adjust position with precognitive precision. "Remarkable," the captain said, completely unruffled. "Alucard, you've grown slow in your domestication. Or perhaps you need better motivation." He threw something, a small sphere that rolled toward them and emitted a pulse of UV light so intense Blade's protective glasses barely filtered it. Alucard screamed, a sound of genuine agony that made the walls crack, and retreated behind a concrete pillar while his exposed skin blistered and burned. Blade charged through the light, eyes protected, and engaged the captain in close combat. The man fought with perfect technique, military precision combined with superhuman awareness. Every strike Blade made was predicted and countered. Every feint was read and punished. It was like fighting someone who could see half a second into the future. "You're enhanced," Blade grunted, blocking a strike that numbed his entire arm. "Werewolf," the captain corrected pleasantly. "Millennium's finest creation. Not vampire, not human, but something beautifully between." He caught Blade's sword hand and twisted with strength that matched Blade's own. "We're not so different, you and I. Both hybrids, both weapons created through scientific intervention. The difference? I've accepted what I am." He threw Blade across the room. Blade hit a containment cell hard enough to crack the reinforced glass, dropped, rolled, and came up firing. The captain dodged with that same impossible awareness, already moving toward the lab's emergency exit. "Do give my regards to Fräulein Hellsing," he called back. "Tell her Millennium sends its compliments. We'll be in touch regarding the dimensional breach technology." "Oh, and Mr. Blade?" The captain's smile turned predatory. "We'll be replicating your serum for our own hybrid program. Imagine it, vampire soldiers with none of the weaknesses. No thirst to control, no sunlight vulnerability, just pure predatory efficiency." He was gone before Blade could stop him, disappearing into smoke and emergency lighting with the stolen research. Alucard emerged from cover, his skin still healing from UV burns, rage radiating from him like heat. "Millennium," he snarled. "Nazi vampires, survived World War II, hiding in South America, building their strength. They've been quiet for decades. This," he gestured at the destroyed lab, "this is a declaration of war." Blade stared at the carnage, at the dead soldiers, at the stolen research that could be used to create an army of daywalkers without conscience or control. He'd come to this world by accident, and now his very existence had become a weapon someone else would wield. "We need to tell Integra," Blade said. "Master already knows," Alucard replied, tapping his temple. "She's evacuating the archives and securing the manor. But you need to understand something, Daywalker." The vampire's eyes were serious for the first time since they'd met. Millennium doesn't just want to create vampires. They want to create chaos, to start a war that will burn the world. And they've just gained access to technology that could tip the balance. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Saris appeared, blood spattered but alive, followed by Integra and a squad of soldiers. The Hellsing director surveyed the damage with barely contained fury. "Status," she demanded. "They got the dimensional research and Blade's blood samples," Alucard reported. The captain personally led the extraction. It was a surgical strike masked by Anderson's raid. Integra's jaw tightened. Then Iscariot was manipulated as well. The captain used Vatican intelligence to coordinate timing. She turned to Blade. "Mr. Blade, I'm sorry. Your presence here has become a liability through no fault of your own. Millennium will weaponize everything they learned about you." "Then we stop them," Blade said simply, "before they can mass-produce hybrid vampires and unleash them on your world." "We?" Integra studied him. "An hour ago you wanted to stake my operatives. Now you're volunteering for war against an organization you know nothing about?" "They have my blood," Blade said flatly. "They're going to create monsters using my condition. That makes it my responsibility." He met her gaze. "Besides, I need dimensional breach technology to get home. If Millennium has it, I'm going after them anyway." Alucard laughed, the sound echoing through the ruined laboratory. "Oh, Master, I told you he'd be entertaining." Integra pulled out another cigar, lit it with steady hands despite the chaos surrounding them. "Very well, Mr. Blade. Welcome to the war. Walter will brief you on Millennium's history and capabilities. Alucard will take you into the field for intelligence gathering. And God help us all, because we've just made an enemy of the most dangerous vampire organization in existence." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Mr. Blade, in this war, you'll need to fight alongside monsters to destroy worse monsters. I suggest you make peace with that reality quickly. Survival depends on it." Blade watched her go, then looked at Alucard, at Saris, Noan at the blood-soaked laboratory that represented the collision of his nature with this world's nightmare politics. He'd spent his life hunting alone, trusting no one, especially not vampires. Now he was allied with the very things he'd sworn to destroy, fighting enemies he didn't understand, in a war that threatened both worlds. But the alternative was letting Millennium create an army of soulless daywalkers, and that Blade couldn't allow. "Where do we start?" he asked. Alucard's grin returned, all teeth and malice and dark promise. "With blood, Daywalker, always with blood." Walter's briefing room was underground, behind 3 security doors and wards that made Blade's teeth ache. The elderly butler moved through the space with military efficiency, pulling up files on a projection screen, while Blade, Integra, Alucard, and Saras gathered around a conference table scarred with decades of strategic planning. "Millennium?" Walter began, his cultured voice carrying the weight of historical authority. "Nazi Vampire Research Division, established 1944 under Major Montana Max. Their goal, create a vampire army immune to traditional weaknesses. They succeeded partially, creating artificial vampires through a chip implantation process rather than traditional blood transmission." The screen showed grainy World War II footage, soldiers with glowing eyes moving with inhuman speed, tearing through Allied positions. Blade leaned forward, studying the movements. These weren't like any vampires he'd encountered. They moved with mechanical precision, no wasted motion, no individual personality visible in their attacks. "While Hellsing destroyed their primary facility in 1944, Walter continued, "we believed we'd eliminated the entire organization. We were wrong. The Major and his core command structure escaped to South America with samples, research, and enough resources to rebuild." Another image appeared, a fat man in Nazi uniform, smiling at the camera with disturbing pleasantness. The Major, true believer in war as an art form, not a vampire himself, but obsessed with creating them. "Why surface now?" Blade asked. 60 years of hiding, then suddenly raiding Hellsing Manor? "The dimensional breaches," Integra said, tapping ash from her cigar. "Someone's been experimenting with reality manipulation. We believe Millennium acquired the technology and has been testing it. Your arrival confirmed the breaches are stable enough to pull matter through?" Alucard lounged in his chair, boots on the table, seemingly bored. But Blade had learned to read the vampire's tells. the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes tracked every word. He was paying attention, just hiding it under layers of theatrical disinterest. "What's their endgame?" Blade pressed. Walter pulled up another file. "Based on intercepted communications and pattern analysis, we believe Millennium is planning a full-scale assault on London. Not to conquer. The Major doesn't want territory. He wants spectacle. A war broadcast globally, vampires versus humans and the supernatural organizations that protect them. The ultimate expression of his philosophy." "That's insane," Sarah said quietly. "That's the Major," Walter replied. "He views war as the ultimate human expression. Creating vampires was never about power. It was about enabling eternal conflict." Blade processed this. In his world, vampires were predators driven by hunger and survival. But Millennium had industrialized vampirism, turned it into an ideology. They weren't creating monsters to feed. They were creating them to wage philosophical war. "And now they have my blood," Blade said. "What can they do with it?" Walter's expression grew grave. "Your biochemistry represents something unprecedented. Vampire abilities without traditional vulnerabilities. If Millennium can replicate your serum, they could create Daywalker soldiers. Vampires who can operate in sunlight, who don't need to feed constantly, who maintain rational thought without the bloodlust." He paused. "Own an army of creatures with your abilities but none of your moral restraint." The room fell silent. Even Alucard's grin had faded. "How long?" Integra asked. "Unknown. Weeks to reverse engineer the serum formula. Months to perfect mass production. But the captain's raid was surgical. He knew exactly what samples to take." "Someone on their side understands your biology, Mr. Blade. That suggests they've been preparing for this opportunity." Blade's jaw tightened. Whoever had pulled him into this dimension, whether intentional or accidental, had given Millennium exactly what they needed to escalate their war beyond anything this world had seen. "We need to hit them first," Blade said. "Find their facility, destroy the research, kill everyone involved." "Spoken like a true hunter," Alucard said approvingly. "I'm starting to like you. A Daywalker." "We don't know where their primary base is," Integra countered. "Millennium has remained hidden for 6 decades. They have resources, international connections, and enough discipline to avoid detection. We can't simply storm in when we don't know where it is." "Then we make them come to us," Blade said. "They want dimensional breach technology? Let them think Hellsing is conducting experiments. Set a trap." "Using what bait?" Saris asked. Blade met Integra's gaze. "Me. They want to study a living Daywalker. Give them the opportunity." Alucard sat up, interest sparking in his crimson eyes. "Oh, I like this plan. It has all the dramatic flair of a good suicide mission." "It's tactically sound," Blade insisted. "Millennium knows I'm here. They'll be monitoring Helsing's activities. Stage a public operation, something that requires a Daywalker's abilities. Make it obvious. They'll either attack to capture me or send infiltrators to observe. Either way, we get intelligence on their current operational capacity." Integra studied him with calculating intensity. "You're proposing to make yourself a target." "I've been a target my entire life," Blade replied. "Difference is, this time I'll have backup." He glanced at Alucard and Saris. "Supposedly." "The issue," Walter interjected, "is that Millennium isn't our only concern. Iscariot was used in tonight's raid, which means Vatican intelligence has been compromised. Father Anderson will report your existence to his superiors. They'll want to investigate, possibly eliminate you as an abomination." "Let them try," Blade said flatly. "They will," Integra said. "Anderson is Section 13's top operative, but he's not their only weapon. If Maxwell decides you're a threat to Catholic doctrine on vampirism, he'll send papal forces after you. We could find ourselves fighting a two-front war, Millennium and Iscariot simultaneously." "Then we need to move fast," Blade said, "before either organization can fully mobilize. Hit Millennium's intelligence network. Force them to expose their positions." Alucard leaned forward, elbows on the table, chin resting on interlaced fingers. "Tell me, Daywalker, in your world, when you hunt vampires, do you ever let them think they're hunting you? Do you ever let them believe they have the advantage, right up until you take their heads? Every time, Blade said. Then you understand the psychology. Millennium believes they have the advantage. They have your blood, your research, and the element of surprise. We let them continue believing that while we prepare the real trap. Alucard's grin returned, sharp and vicious. I do so enjoy it when prey thinks it's the predator. Integra crushed out her cigar with decisive finality. Very well. We'll stage an operation. Walter, identify a target that would logically require both traditional Hellsing forces and a Daywalker's unique abilities. Something public enough to draw attention, but defensible enough to control the engagement. Alucard, you'll provide overwatch. Saros, you're on Blade's squad as liaison. Master, Saros said hesitantly, if Millennium attacks in force, then we'll finally have the opportunity to decimate their operational capacity before they launch their larger assault, Integra finished. This is calculated risk, but it's better than waiting for them to strike when and where they choose. She turned to Blade. You'll be issued Hellsing communication equipment and assigned a tactical call sign. You'll follow orders from command during the operation. And Mr. Blade, her voice hardened, if you compromise this mission because you can't work alongside my vampire operatives, I'll have Alucard personally ensure you never interfere with Hellsing operations again. Are we clear? Crystal, Blade said. Good. Walter, begin preparations. Briefing in 6 hours. Dismissed. As the others filed out, Alucard lingered, studying Blade with unsettling intensity. You know they'll try to capture you alive, the vampire said conversationally. Millennium needs a living specimen to perfect their serum. They'll send overwhelming force to subdue, not kill. I know. And you're volunteering for this anyway. Why? You barely know this world. You owe us nothing. You could simply wait for us to find the dimensional breach technology and send you home. Blade checked his weapons with methodical precision. Because I've spent my life cleaning up after vampires. Every massacre, every turned human, every monster that spreads the infection. That's on the vampire that created them. If Millennium makes Daywalkers using my blood, every person those creatures kill is on me. Guilt, Alucard said, sounding almost disappointed. How tediously human. It's called responsibility, Blade corrected. Something you wouldn't understand. Wouldn't I? Alucard's tone shifted, losing its mocking edge. I am Dracula, Daywalker, Vlad Tepes, the Impaler. I've ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, and slaughtered thousands in the name of defending my people. I know responsibility. I know the weight of every death ordered, every life taken, every soul consumed. He moved closer, eyes glowing in the dim light. The difference between us is that I've accepted the monster I am. You still think you can transcend yours through righteous violence. I don't need psychological analysis from a vampire, Blade said. Don't you? Because from where I stand, you're the most conflicted creature I've met in 4 centuries. You hate vampires, yet you use vampire abilities. You hunt monsters, yet you are one. You suppress the thirst, yet every day you wake up knowing it's there, waiting for your control to slip. Alucard's smile was cruel and knowing. Tell me, Daywalker, what happens when you run out of serum in this world? When your supply runs dry and the hunger comes crawling back? Will you still be the righteous hunter, or will you finally accept what you truly are? Blade's hand was on his sword hilt before he consciously decided to move. You want to find out the hard way? Always, Alucard purred, but not today. Master has forbidden it, and unlike you, I'm comfortable with my leash. He turned to leave, coat swirling dramatically. 6 hours, Daywalker. Try to get some rest. You'll need it. Millennium plays for keeps, and they've had 60 years to perfect the art of war. Alone in the briefing room, Blade stared at the frozen image of the Major on the screen. That pleasant smile hiding decades of patience and planning. In his world, vampire threats were immediate and visceral. Hunt them, kill them, move to the next target. But here, the threats were organized, militarized, and playing games on scales he was only beginning to understand. He pulled out his serum injector and stared at it. 3 doses left, maybe 4 if he rationed carefully. After that, Blade pushed the thought away and injected the serum. The familiar relief flooded his system, pushing back the hunger that never truly slept. He'd worry about long-term survival after he'd prevented Millennium from creating an army of soulless daywalkers. One crisis at a time. He made his way back to his quarters, hyper-aware of the manor around him. Hellsing soldiers on patrol, weapons ready. Walter coordinating logistics with quiet efficiency. Somewhere deep below, Alucard had returned to his basement lair, probably already sleeping in whatever coffin or sarcophagus he preferred. And in her office, one Integra Hellsing planned war against enemies who'd spent 60 years preparing for this moment. Blade checked his weapons one final time, then forced himself to rest. 6 hours until the operation, 6 hours to prepare for the fight that would determine whether his curse became a template for atrocity or remained his burden alone. In the darkness, he dreamed of his mother's screams and a vampire's laughter, and woke 3 hours later with the taste of blood in his mouth that no amount of serum could fully wash away. The thirst was always there, always waiting. And in a facility somewhere across the world, Millennium scientists studied his blood samples and smiled at the possibilities. The target was a warehouse in Southwark, when across the Thames from the financial district, 3 stories of Victorian industrial architecture that had been abandoned for 2 decades. According to Hellsing intelligence, a vampire nest had established itself in the lower levels, using the location to traffic victims from the nearby homeless population. 16 missing persons in 3 months, bodies occasionally surfacing in the river with familiar puncture wounds. Routine extermination. Except nothing about this operation was routine. Blade stood in the staging area behind an armored transport, checking his loadout while Hellsing soldiers prepared for deployment. Saris was beside him, nervous energy radiating from her as she triple-checked her Harkonnen cannon, a massive anti-tank weapon that looked absurd in her small hands until you remembered what she was. You've done this before?" Blade asked. "Cleared nests?" "Yeah, 5 times since I was turned." Saris adjusted her harness. "Never with someone like you, though. Sir Integros says you've been hunting vampires for decades?" "Since I was 16, Blade confirmed. 27 years of putting down bloodsuckers." "And you've never," Saris hesitated, "never fed? Not once?" Blade's jaw tightened. "No. How? The hunger, it's constant, like static in your brain that never stops. I feed on medical blood packs, but even that barely dulls it. How do you resist for decades?" "Serum, discipline, and remembering what they are." Blade loaded silver rounds into his Beretta with mechanical precision. "Every vampire I've met has been a predator. They might talk about control, about choosing not to feed on humans, but eventually the nature wins. And always, is that what you see when you look at me?" Saris asked quietly. "A predator waiting to slip?" Blade studied her, saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear of him, but fear of herself. Fear of what she was becoming. It reminded him uncomfortably of his own reflection every morning. "I see someone fighting their nature," he said finally. "Whether you'll win that fight remains to be seen." "Comforting," Saris muttered, but there was a ghost of a smile on her face. Walter approached, carrying a tactical radio and earpiece. "Mr. Blade, you're designated Hunter 1 for this operation. Saris is Hunter 2. Command will coordinate from the mobile unit. Alucard is providing aerial overwatch from a nearby rooftop." "Aerial?" Blade raised an eyebrow. "Aaron, he can phase into mist and observe from advantageous positions," Walter explained with the tone of someone describing perfectly normal tactical capabilities. "If Millennium attacks, he'll intercept and buy you time to extract. And if Iscariot shows up, then things become complicated," Walter admitted. "Father Anderson has been unusually quiet since the Manor raid. We're unsure if that means Vatican Command is planning something larger or if they're reassessing their intelligence on you." Integra's voice crackled through the radio. "All units, sound off." The response was crisp and professional. 4 tactical teams, 20 soldiers total, plus Blade and Saris as the supernatural heavy hitters. Standard Hellsing deployment for nest extermination, except this time they were counting on being observed. "Key rules of engagement," Integra continued. "Capture any vampire that surrenders for interrogation. Destroy any that resist. Protect civilian lives at all costs. And Hunter 1," her voice carried particular emphasis, We need at least one vampire alive to confirm this nest connection to larger networks. Don't kill everything that moves. Copy that, Blade responded, though his instincts screamed against leaving vampires alive for any reason. The transport rumbled through London's night streets. Blade watched the city pass, so similar to New York in some ways, utterly foreign in others. The architecture older, the streets narrower, the weight of history heavier in every stone. But darkness was darkness, and predators were predators regardless of geography. You ever think about what you'd do if the serum stopped working? Saris asked suddenly. Blade glanced at her. Why? Because I think about it, about what happens if I lose control. If the hunger gets too strong and She trailed off. Sir Inigra would order Alucard to destroy me. I know that. It's in my contract. But knowing doesn't make it easier. Then don't lose control, Blade said simply. Is it that easy for you? Blade was silent for a long moment. No, he admitted. Every day is a fight. Every night I can smell blood on the air and feel the thirst clawing at my discipline. The serum helps, but it's not a cure. It's just postponement. So we're both one mistake away from becoming the thing we hunt, Sarah said. Yeah, Blade agreed. We are. The transport stopped 3 blocks from the target. Or teams deployed with silent efficiency, taking positions around the warehouse's perimeter. Blade and Saris approached the main entrance, a rusted metal door half buried in urban decay and graffiti. Smell that? Saris whispered, her vampire senses active. Blade nodded. Blood. Old and new. Fierce sweat. And underneath it all, the distinctive scent of vampire presence. Like corruption and perfume trying to mask each other. At least a dozen inside, he estimated. Maybe more in the sublevels. I count 14 distinct signatures, Saris confirmed, but something feels wrong. They're too organized. Vampires this young usually scatter at the first sign of threat, but these are holding formation. Blade's hand moved to his sword. Trap? Or they're expecting us, Saris said. Sir Integra, Hunter 2 reporting unusual tactical discipline from targets. Integra's response was immediate. Proceed with caution. Alucard confirms similar observation from his position. Multiple heat signatures in defensive formations. This doesn't match typical fledgling behavior. Someone's commanding them, Blade said. A master vampire. Older, experienced. Then we go in hard and fast, Sarah said, charging her Harkonnen, before they can coordinate a response. They breached the door simultaneously, Blade kicking it off its hinges while Saras provided covering fire. The warehouse interior was exactly what Blade expected. Shadowed industrial space, rusted equipment, and the detritus of human misery scattered across stained concrete. The vampires were waiting. They emerged from the shadows with coordinated precision. 14 fledglings in street clothes, eyes glowing red, moving in a formation that spoke of military training. Not the chaotic rush of newly turned monsters, but disciplined soldiers. Millennium, Blade realized. The vampires attacked as one. Blade met them with decades of experience, his sword singing through the air in arcs of silver fire. He took the first one's head before it completed its lunge, reversed the stroke to open the second's throat, and put 3 rounds through a third's chest before it could close distance. Saras's Harkonnen roared, the massive cannon round punching through 2 vampires and destroying a support pillar in a shower of concrete. She fought with raw power and instinct, less refined than Blade's technique, but devastatingly effective. But something was wrong. These vampires fought with suicidal aggression, pressing attacks even as Blade carved through them. They weren't trying to win, they were trying to delay. "It's a distraction," Blade shouted, but the warning came too late. The warehouse's far wall exploded inward. Through the dust and debris came something that made even Blade's battle-hardened nerves scream warnings. A man, if you could call him that, 8 feet tall, wrapped in bandages stained with blood that looked fresh despite being decades old. His eyes were empty sockets filled with writhing darkness, and he moved with the jerking, unnatural gait of something that should be dead but refused to accept that reality. "Mein Gott," Saras whispered. The creature spoke in a voice like grinding tombstones. "Targets acquired. Are initiating capture protocol." Its German accent was thick, words slurred as if speaking through a throat half destroyed. More figures entered behind him, Millennium soldiers in black combat gear, carrying weapons that crackled with electrical discharge. Specialized equipment designed for capturing supernatural targets alive. Blade opened fire, silver rounds punching into the bandaged creature's torso. It barely flinched. Seras fired her Harkonnen. The round hit center mass and detonated, blowing a hole the size of a basketball through the creature's chest. It kept walking. "Recommendations?" Seras asked, voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Run," Blade said. They ran. Behind them, the creature's laughter echoed like an avalanche of corpses, and Millennium's trap closed with mechanical precision. A blade burst through a side door into an alley, Seras right behind him. The Hellsing tactical teams were engaging Millennium forces across multiple positions, gunfire and explosions transforming the quiet London neighborhood into a war zone. "Hunter 1 to command," Blade gasped into his radio. "We've got heavy resistance. Millennium brought something big. Recommend immediate extraction." "Negative," Integra's voice crackled back. "Alucard is engaging Millennium air support. You're on your own for the next 3 minutes. Survive." The bandaged creature burst through the warehouse wall like it was paper. Millennium soldiers flanked it, weapons tracking Blade and Seras with disturbing precision. "You cannot escape," the creature said in its broken voice. "The Major wishes to study you, Daywalker. You should be honored. You will help create the perfect soldier." "I've got a better idea," Blade said, and threw a UV grenade directly at the creature's face. The explosion of ultraviolet light should have incinerated any vampire. The creature screamed, an inhuman sound of rage and pain. But when the light faded, it was still standing. Burned, yes. Wounded, definitely, but still functional. "What the hell is that thing?" Blade demanded. "Millennium experimental vampire," Sarah said, already moving. "I read about them in the archives. They tried to create vampires immune to traditional weaknesses. That's a prototype, probably from the 1940s. How do we kill it?" "I don't know." The creature charged with impossible speed for something so large. Blade barely dodged, feeling wind from the attack ruffle his coat. He countered with his sword, the blade biting deep into the creature's arm and getting stuck in bandages that seemed to absorb kinetic energy. The creature's other hand grabbed Blade's throat and lifted him off the ground with crushing strength. "The Major sends his regards," it hissed, and Blade felt electricity surge through his body as Millennium soldiers activated their capture equipment. Every muscle locked. His weapons fell from nerveless fingers. The world started going dark at the edges. Then Seras fired her Harkonnen point blank into the creature's head. The round detonated with enough force to vaporize the upper third of the monster's skull. It dropped Blade and staggered backward, regeneration already trying to rebuild destroyed brain tissue. Seras grabbed Blade under the arms and hauled him with supernatural strength. "Move! Move! On, move!" They ran as the creature's roar of fury shook the buildings around them. Behind them, Blade could hear Millennium forces organizing pursuit. Ahead, Hellsing soldiers were establishing a defensive perimeter. Then the air pressure changed. Temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant, and Blade felt Alucard's presence descend on the battlefield like the wrath of God. The vampire materialized from shadow and darkness, his form expanding into something that barely resembled human. Red eyes glowed with predatory glee, and his voice echoed from everywhere at once. "Did someone call for pest control?" What happened next was carnage. Alucard tore through Millennium forces with gleeful brutality, his guns never emptying, his regeneration making him effectively immortal. Yet Blade watched from relative safety as the most powerful vampire he'd ever encountered demonstrated why Integra kept him leashed. Because unleashed, Alucard was a force of nature. The bandaged creature tried to engage him. Alucard laughed and tore it apart with bare hands, scattering its components across the street with casual violence. Within 90 seconds, the Millennium assault force was destroyed or retreating. Alucard stood among the corpses, coat billowing in wind that wasn't there, grinning like a demon at a massacre. "Well," he said cheerfully, "that was refreshing. Shall we head home for tea?" Blade retrieved his weapons on shaking legs, adrenaline still coursing through his system. They'd survived, barely, and Millennium had demonstrated they were willing to deploy experimental horrors to capture him. The war was escalating faster than anyone had anticipated. The debriefing room felt smaller with fury filling it. Integra paced behind her desk, cigar smoke trailing like contrails from a bomber, while Blade sat with ice pressed against his bruised throat. Sarah stood at attention despite the blood staining her uniform. Some hers, most belonging to things that had tried to kill her. Alucard lounged against the wall, still looking pleased with himself. 17 Hellsing soldiers wounded, 3 critically, Integra said, voice tight with controlled rage. 1 armored transport destroyed. Half of Southwark witnessed a supernatural battle that will require significant resources to cover up, and Millennium extracted tissue samples during the electrical capture attempt. Blade's hand tightened on the ice pack. What? Walter stepped forward, not tablet in hand, looking grave. The capture equipment they used wasn't just for incapacitation. It included bio-extraction needles, microscopic. You wouldn't have felt them through the electrical shock. He pulled up an analysis on the main screen. They got skin cells, blood samples, and what appears to be muscle tissue. Not much, maybe a few milligrams, but enough for accelerated analysis. So they have everything they need, Blade said flatly. Not everything. They still need to successfully synthesize your serum formula, which requires understanding the precise biochemical balance you maintain. That could take weeks. Walter paused. However, they can begin creating hybrid vampire templates immediately using your tissue as a genetic baseline. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. How long until they have operational hybrids? Unknown. But given Millennium's resources and their 60 years of vampire research, Walter's expression was grim. Days, not weeks. Integra crushed out her cigar with decisive violence. Which means we're out of time for reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. We need to locate their primary facility and destroy it before they can deploy hybrid forces. Easier said than done, Alucard observed. Millennium has remained hidden since 1944. They're not going to expose their base just because we want them to. They already have, Blade said. Everyone turned to look at him. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small electronic device, damaged but intact. Pulled this off one of their soldiers during the fight. Communications relay, military-grade encryption, but it's been actively transmitting. Walter took the device with raised eyebrows. You stole Millennium communications equipment during a combat engagement? Old habit, Blade said. In my world, vampire organizations get sloppy. They rely on supernatural advantages and forget basic operational security. I'm guessing these Nazi bastards made the same mistake. They're not that careless, Integra countered. Maybe not, but their soldiers are. That creature, the bandaged one, it was talking, giving orders, coordinating with command in real time. Blade stood, ignoring his body's protests, which means there's active communication happening, and communication can be traced. Alucard's grin widened. Oh, I really do like you, Daywalker. You think like a hunter, not a soldier. Walter was already connecting the device to Hellsing's analysis systems. Encrypted military frequencies, constantly changing channels. But there's a pattern in the rotation schedule. His fingers flew across keyboards. If I can isolate the base frequency and triangulate transmission sources, he paused. Bloody hell. What? Integra demanded. Multiple transmission sources. London, Manchester, Edinburgh, Dover. They're not operating from a single facility. They have cells throughout the UK. Walter pulled up a map showing signal clusters. And the encryption is breaking faster than it should, almost as if they want us to decode it, Blade finished. Another trap. Or an invitation, Alucard said. The Major loves theater, loves making grand gestures. Perhaps he's decided to accelerate his timetable and wants us to know where to find him? Integra studied the map with tactical calculation. Walter, how confident are you in these locations? 70%. The signals are genuine Millennium encryption patterns. But whether the sources are primary facilities or decoys, he shrugged. We'd need physical reconnaissance to confirm. Then we split up, Sarah suggested. Hit multiple sites simultaneously. Force them to respond and reveal which locations are vital. Spread our forces too thin, and Millennium destroys us piecemeal, Integra countered. They'd love nothing more than to isolate our supernatural operatives, and overwhelm them with numbers. Blade studied the map, mind working through tactical permutations. 4 sites, limited assets. An enemy that had spent decades preparing for this confrontation. Standard assault doctrine wouldn't work. Millennium had proven they could match Hellsing's conventional forces and had counters for supernatural threats. "We don't hit all 4, Blade said. "We make them think we're hitting all 4, then concentrate force on one. Deception operation." "Explain," Integra said. "Your soldiers create diversions at 3 sites. Loud, visible, convincing enough to pull Millennium's attention and forces. Meanwhile, he gestured to Alucard, Saris, and himself, we infiltrate the 4th site with minimal support. Fast insertion, gather intelligence, destroy high-value targets, extract before they can respond in force. 3 diversions means 3 groups of my soldiers facing Millennium forces without supernatural support," Integra said. Casualties will be significant." "They'll have support," Blade countered, "just not obvious support. Alucard can phase between locations. He creates chaos at one site, vanishes, appears at another. Millennium's forces won't know where he actually is. Makes them hesitant, defensive. Buys time for your soldiers to extract once the real operation is complete." Alucard tilted his head, considering. "Using me as a terror weapon to cover conventional forces? How delightfully pragmatic. I approve." "And if we choose the wrong target for infiltration?" Saris asked. "If the real facility is one of the diversion sites?" "Then we adapt," Blade said. "Soldiers find evidence of the primary facility. They signal. We redirect. The goal isn't to destroy Millennium in one strike. It's to gather enough intelligence to plan the killing blow." Integra walked to the window, looking out at London's skyline. The city she'd sworn to protect, now hosting a Nazi vampire organization preparing for war. She'd inherited this burden from her father, who'd inherited it from his father, stretching back generations. The weight of duty and legacy hung heavy in the silence. "Walter," she said finally, "analyze the 4 sites. Prioritize based on infrastructure requirements for genetic research. Blade's right. Millennium needs laboratory facilities to synthesize the Daywalker serum. That narrows our target selection." "Already on it," Walter replied, fingers dancing across keyboards. "Cross-referencing with known Millennium resource acquisition patterns, medical supply shipments, and when power consumption anomalies." The map updated, 2 of the 4 sites graying out. Manchester and Edinburgh facilities show residential and light industrial signatures. London and Dover both have infrastructure consistent with advanced laboratory operations. "London or Dover," Integra mused. "London gives them proximity to target-rich environments and easy access to international transportation. Dover provides port access and isolation from civilian surveillance." "Dover," Blade said with certainty. "Why?" "Because Millennium's planning a war, not a research project. They need space to train forces, store equipment, and coordinate large-scale operations. London's too exposed, too monitored. Dover's port facilities give them everything. Shipping access for equipment and personnel, industrial spaces that won't attract attention, short and proximity to the channel if they need emergency extraction to the continent." Alucard laughed softly. "He's not wrong, Master. The major thing's big. He'd want room for his 1,000 vampire army, his zeppelins, his grand theatrical finale. Dover's port district would provide exactly that." Integra turned from the window. "Very well. Dover is primary target. Walter, coordinate with our field teams. I want diversionary operations at Manchester, Edinburgh, and London to commence in 6 hours. Make them loud enough to convince Millennium we're committing full resources." "And our infiltration team?" Saris asked. "You, Blade, and a 6-man tactical support unit," Integra said. "Alucard will provide mobile support across all sites, prioritizing your location if heavy resistance materializes. Rules of engagement: gather intelligence on hybrid vampire development, identify command structure, and if opportunity presents itself, eliminate the major." "You want us to assassinate their leader during a reconnaissance mission?" Blade raised an eyebrow. "I want you to seize any tactical advantage that presents itself," Integra corrected. "The major is Millennium's ideological core. Remove him, and the organization may fracture. But intelligence is the priority. We need to know what we're facing before the full assault begins." She pulled out a fresh cigar, lit it, and fixed Blade with her ice blue stare. "Mr. Blade, you've been in this world less than 48 hours. You owe Hellsing nothing beyond our temporary alliance. This operation carries significant risk of capture or death. Are you certain you want to volunteer for what amounts to a suicide mission into a Nazi vampire stronghold?" Blade checked his weapons with methodical precision. Sword, guns, stakes, UV grenades, serum injectors. Everything in place, everything ready. "They have my blood. They're using it to create monsters. That makes it personal." "Personal," Alucard echoed. "How wonderfully human. Tell me, Daywalker, when you're surrounded by Millennium's hybrid vampires, creatures that share your abilities but lack your restraint, will you see them as enemies, or will you see yourself?" Blade met the ancient vampire's gaze without flinching. "I'll see targets, same as always." "Liar," Alucard said pleasantly, "but a useful liar. Very well, let's go see what horrors science has wrought in my image." The preparation took 4 hours. Blade familiarized himself with Hellsing's tactical protocols, memorized Dover's port district layout, and coordinated with the 6-man support team, professional soldiers who'd fought alongside vampires long enough to hide their nervousness around him. Saris checked her equipment with obsessive thoroughness, the Harkonnen's massive weight comfortable in her enhanced grip. She'd been quiet since the briefing, lost in thought. "You worried?" Blade asked as they loaded into the transport. "Terrified," Saras admitted. "Not of dying, of... What if we find hybrid vampires and they're better than me? Stronger, faster, no weaknesses. What if I'm already obsolete?" "You're not a weapon to be upgraded," Blade said. "You're a person who happens to have abilities. Don't confuse the two." Says the man who introduced himself as a vampire hunter. Not Eric Brooks. Blade was silent for a moment. "Yeah," he said finally. "I do that too." The transport rolled through London's pre-dawn streets. In 3 hours, Hellsing forces would stage simultaneous raids across England, drawing Millennium's attention while Blade's team infiltrated Dover. It was aggressive, risky, and relied on the enemy making predictable tactical decisions. But sometimes the best strategy was the obvious one executed with overwhelming conviction. Blade felt his serum supply, 2 doses left, maybe 3 if he stretched it. After Dover, he'd need to either synthesize more using Hellsing's resources or accept that the thirst would return in force. One problem at a time. The transport's radio crackled, Integra's voice calm and commanding. "All teams, final status check." Responses came in sequence. "Our Manchester team ready, Edinburgh team ready, London team ready." Blade keyed his radio. "Hunter 1, ready." "Then God be with you all," Integra said. "Commence Operation Daybreak in 3 hours. Hellsing expects every soldier to do their duty." Blade watched London disappear behind them as the transport headed toward Dover, toward Millennium's hidden facility, toward a confrontation with creatures wearing his curse like a uniform. Beside him, Saris whispered something that might have been a prayer. And somewhere in the ether, Alucard's laughter echoed through the darkness, eager for the violence to come. Dover's port district at 4 in the morning was industrial desolation. Cranes silhouetted against pre-dawn gray, shipping containers stacked like tombstones in the smell of salt and diesel heavy in the cold air. A Blade moved through the shadows with practiced silence. Saras beside him, 6 Hellsing soldiers fanned out in tactical formation behind them. The target facility was Warehouse Complex 7, a cluster of industrial buildings officially owned by a German shipping company that hadn't processed legitimate cargo in 15 years. Walter's intelligence showed power consumption far exceeding what abandoned buildings should draw, thermal signatures suggesting underground expansion, and peculiar shipments arriving monthly from South American ports. Everything pointed to Millennium. "Hunter 1 to command," Blade whispered into his throat mic. "Approaching perimeter, no visible security." "Confirmed," Integra's voice crackled back from Hellsing Manor. "That's consistent with Millennium's operational doctrine. When they rely on supernatural defenders rather than conventional security. Proceed with caution." Blade signaled the team forward. They crossed open ground toward the main warehouse, moving between containers that provided cover and concealment. Too easy. His instincts screamed warnings. But sometimes the obvious approach was the only approach. They reached the warehouse's loading dock. The door was unlocked. "Definitely a trap," Saras muttered, her vampire senses on full alert. "Yep," Blade agreed, and entered anyway. The warehouse interior was vast darkness broken by emergency lighting that cast everything in sickly yellow. Blade's enhanced vision adjusted immediately, revealing empty space where cargo should be, catwalks overhead, and a freight elevator in the center leading down. "Honey, underground facility," one of the Hellsing soldiers confirmed, checking a handheld scanner. "Detecting significant electromagnetic interference below. Active power sources, possibly electronic equipment." Blade studied the elevator. Large enough for cargo, reinforced cables suggesting it could handle serious weight, and fresh grease on the mechanisms. "Someone used this regularly." "Options?" Saras asked. "Elevators loud and obvious. Gives them time to prepare." Blade scanned the warehouse, found what he was looking for, a maintenance access shaft in the corner. "We go down quiet. Soldiers hold the surface, provide extraction support if we need to leave fast." The team leader, a grizzled veteran named Simmons, nodded. "We'll secure the perimeter and maintain communications. You run into heavy resistance, call for immediate extraction. Yes, we'll bring the building down if necessary." Blade and Saras approached the maintenance shaft. It descended into darkness that smelled wrong, antiseptic chemicals mixing with old blood and something else. Something that made Blade's vampire senses recoil. They climbed down into Millennium's nightmare. The shaft opened into a corridor that belonged in a military installation, not an abandoned warehouse. Fluorescent lights, sterile white walls, security cameras at regular intervals. Blade put 3 bullets through the nearest cameras with suppressed precision. No point in stealth if they were already being watched. "Which way?" Saras whispered. Blade closed his eyes, extending his supernatural awareness. Felt the thrum of machinery, the subtle vibration of ventilation systems, and underneath it all, the presence of vampires. Lots of them. But these felt different from normal vampires. More uniform, less individual, like products on an assembly line. "Left," he said. "Follow the smell." They moved through corridors that spoke of extensive underground construction. This facility had been here for years, expanded gradually, hidden beneath the legitimate port operations above. Millennium had been patient, building their strength while the world forgot about Nazi vampires from a war that ended 60 years ago. They found the first laboratory behind a door marked "Experimental Development, Authorized Personnel Only." Blade kicked it open, weapons ready. Inside was a horror show that made even his hardened stomach turn. Medical equipment surrounded examination tables where bodies lay restrained. Some human, some vampire, some things that were becoming something in between. Mirai V lines dripped fluids into them, monitoring equipment tracked vital signs, and in the corner, a bank of computers displayed genetic sequences, scrolling past faster than human eyes could follow. But what drew Blade's attention was the tank. It dominated the center of the laboratory, a cylindrical chamber filled with red liquid, maybe 15 feet tall. And inside, suspended in the fluid, was a figure that could have been Blade's twin. Same build, same bone structure, same dark skin and features. Except this version had eyes that glowed with vampire hunger and no trace of humanity in its expression. It floated in suspended animation, tubes running into its spine and skull, while data screens beside the tank displayed constantly updating information. "Subject Omega-7, Saras read from a nearby terminal, voice shaking. "Each a genetic template, Daywalker sample acquired London raid, vampire strain, Millennium artificial type C, serum synthesis 73% complete, combat effectiveness projected 340% standard vampire baseline." Blade stared at the thing wearing his face. "They cloned me." "Not exactly," Saras said, reading further. "They used your genetic code as a template, but spliced in vampire DNA and Millennium's artificial enhancement. It's like you, but if you'd been created in a laboratory without any humanity left." "How many?" Blade's voice was flat, emotionless. Saras's face went pale. "According to this, they've initiated 47 hybrid development projects. Omega-7 is the most advanced. The others are in various stages of growth acceleration." 47. 47 creatures with his abilities, his strengths, None of his weaknesses are in absolutely no moral restraint. Millennium was building an army of daywalkers, and they were using his stolen blood to do it. Blade raised his gun and put 5 rounds through the tank. The glass, or whatever reinforced material it was, spiderwebbed, but didn't shatter. Alarms shrieked, red emergency lighting activated, and in the tank, Omega-7's eyes opened. "Bollocks," Sarah said eloquently. The tank exploded outward in a gout of red fluid and broken containment. Omega-7 dropped into a crouch, tubes tearing free from its body, and looked directly at Blade with eyes that held nothing but hunger and programmed violence. "Target acquired," it said in a voice identical to Blade's own. "Terminating original template." It moved with speed that matched Blade's enhanced reflexes, crossing the distance between them in a blur. Blade barely got his sword up in time to block the first strike, a punch that would have caved in his ribcage. The impact sent shockwaves up his arms. Omega-7 fought with perfect technique. Every move Blade had ever perfected, every combat instinct honed over decades. The clone possessed them all because it had been grown from his genetic code, programmed with combat data extracted from his captured tissue samples. It was fighting himself. Saras fired her Harkonnen. The massive round hit Omega-7 in the back and detonated. It staggered, flesh burning, then regenerated in seconds. Vampire healing factor combined with Blade's natural regeneration, amplified by whatever enhancements Millennium had engineered. "Silver doesn't work," Saras shouted. "UV!" Blade yelled back, dodging a strike that pulverized concrete. "Try UV." Saras pulled a UV grenade, armed it, threw it. The explosion of artificial sunlight filled the laboratory. Blade's glasses protected his eyes, but he felt the heat wash over him. Omega-7 screamed, an inhuman sound of rage and pain, its skin blistering and burning. But it didn't die, didn't even slow down significantly. "Partial vulnerability only," a voice said from the laboratory's entrance. "The Omega series retains slight sensitivity to ultraviolet radiation, but the Millennium artificial vampire strain provides sufficient resistance for combat operations." Blade spun to see a small figure in a white coat, a scientist, maybe 50 years old, with the calm demeanor of someone describing weather patterns rather than abominations. Behind him, 24 Millennium soldiers filed into the laboratory, their weapons trained on Blade and Saras. Dr. Kramer, the scientist, introduced himself with a slight bow. "Lead geneticist for the Daywalker Integration Project. You've cost us Omega-7's development cycle by initiating premature activation, but I suppose we needed field test data anyway." Blade kept his attention split between the scientist, the soldiers, and Omega-7, which had stopped attacking and now stood at parade rest, waiting for orders. "You're making monsters." "We're making weapons," Dr. Kramer corrected. "Superior soldiers who combine the best attributes of vampire physiology with your unique genetic advantages. No sunlight weakness, minimal blood dependency once the serum protocol is established, enhanced strength and regeneration, and most importantly," he smiled, "Una absolutely loyal to Millennium command structure." "They're slaves," Sarah said with disgust. "They're tools, like Hellsing's pet vampires, except we don't pretend they're anything else." Dr. Kramer consulted a tablet. "Speaking of which, Miss Victoria, your genetic profile is also quite interesting. A recently turned vampire still struggling with identity. Would you be interested in seeing what you could become with proper optimization?" "I'd rather die," Sarah spat. "That can be arranged," Dr. Kramer said pleasantly and nodded to Omega-7. "Kill the female, capture the original alive. The Major wants to speak with him personally." Omega-7 moved towards Saras with lethal intent. She fired her Harkonnen point blank. The round hit exploded, and Omega-7 came through the blast with regenerated flesh and grabbed her by the throat. Blade drove his sword into Omega-7's spine with enough force to sever vertebrae. The clone released Saras and spun, its fist catching Blade in the ribs with bone-breaking impact. He flew backward into a bank of computers, sparks showering around him. The Millennium soldiers opened fire. Blade rolled behind an examination table as bullets sparked off metal. Saras returned fire with her sidearm, taking down 3 soldiers with precise headshots before the Harkonnen's reload completed. Omega-7 advanced on Blade with mechanical precision. No wasted movement, no hesitation, just pure programmed violence wearing his face. "This is what you are," Omega-7 said in Blade's voice. "This is what you've always been. A weapon pretending to have a soul. A monster wearing human guilt like camouflage. I am you, perfected. I am you." One honest. Blade grabbed a scalpel from a nearby tray and threw it with perfect accuracy. It embedded in Omega-7's eye. The clone barely flinched, pulled it out, regenerated. "You're nothing like me," Blade growled. "No?" Omega-7 tilted its head. "We share the same genetic code, the same abilities, the same hunger burning in our blood. The only difference is that I've accepted the truth you deny every day. We are predators. We are killers. And pretending otherwise doesn't change our nature." It lunged. Blade met it with everything he had. Decades of combat experience, rage at seeing his curse weaponized, and the desperate knowledge that if he failed here, Millennium would mass-produce 46 more of these things. They fought through the laboratory in a whirlwind of violence. Blade used his sword, his guns, his stakes. Nothing permanently stopped Omega-7. The clone matched him move for move, learning from every exchange, adapting to his tactics in real time. Saris was holding off the soldiers, but barely. Her Harkonnen's ammunition was depleting. The Millennium forces had her pinned behind an overturned examination table. They were losing. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness descended on the laboratory for exactly 3 seconds. When emergency lighting flickered back on, Alucard stood in the center of the room, his red coat pristine despite the carnage, his smile wide enough to show every tooth. "Did someone order pest control?" he asked cheerfully, and the slaughter began. Alucard moved through the Millennium soldiers like death given form and enthusiasm. His guns, the Castle and Jackal, roared in stereo, on each shot precisely placed to destroy rather than wound. Soldiers tried to return fire, their bullets punching through his body with no visible effect. He laughed, regenerated, and continued the massacre with artistic flair. "Really, gentlemen," he said, casually decapitating 2 soldiers with a sweep of his arm that had extended into something no longer remotely human. "Did you truly think conventional weapons would work? I'm Dracula. I've been shot by armies. It never ends well for the armies." Dr. Kramer fled toward a secondary exit. Alucard was there before the scientist took 3 steps, materializing from shadow. "Leaving so soon, Herr Doctor? But we haven't even discussed your research methodology. I'm fascinated by genetic manipulation. Tell me." His voice dropped to something ancient and terrible. "Hello, did you scream when the Major first turned you into his puppet?" The scientist's eyes widened in genuine terror. "You can't. The Major will..." Alucard's hand punched through Dr. Kramer's chest, emerging from his back, holding a still-beating heart. "The Major will what? Weep over your corpse? I think not. Now let's see what secrets hide in your blood." He bit into the heart. Blade, still struggling with Omega-7, watched in revolted fascination as Alucard consumed the scientist's essence. The vampire's eyes rolled back, and when they refocused, they glowed with stolen knowledge. "Oh," Alucard breathed. "Oh, Master, you need to hear this." But there was no time for debriefing. Omega-7 used Blade's distraction to land a devastating combination: 3 strikes to the ribs, a knee to the solar plexus, an arm and an elbow that cracked Blade's jaw and sent him sprawling. "You're slower," Omega-7 observed, standing over him. "Your serum levels are depleting. I can smell it. The thirst is returning, and you're fighting on multiple fronts. Against me, against your nature, against the reality that you're obsolete." Blade spat blood. "At least I have a nature to fight. You're just code and conditioning. And yet I'm winning." Omega-7 raised its fist for a killing blow. Saris hit it from the side with her full vampiric strength, tackling the clone through 2 walls into an adjacent room. Blade heard the sounds of their struggle, superhuman impacts, Saris's battle cry, Omega-7's emotionless combat vocalizations. He forced himself up, ribs screaming protest. His vision swam, blood loss, exhaustion, orchon and serum depletion combining into a dangerous cocktail. He pulled his last injector and stabbed it into his neck. The serum flooded his system, pushing back the encroaching thirst. temporary relief. But how many more doses could he manage before his body gave out entirely? Alucard appeared beside him, offering a hand. Blade ignored it and stood on his own. "Stubborn," Alucard observed. "I like that. But we have larger problems." The good doctor's memories revealed something interesting. This facility isn't Millennium's primary base. It's a satellite laboratory. The main operation is in Brazil, as we suspected, but the Major isn't there. "Where?" Blade demanded. "London," Alucard said, his grin turning predatory. "He's been in London the entire time, in a Zeppelin hovering at 15,000 feet, cloaked from radar and observation. And he's not planning to invade England. He's planning to destroy it." Before Blade could process that revelation, Omega-7 crashed back through the wall, Ceres clinging to its back, trying to tear its head off with her bare hands. The clone slammed backward into a support pillar, crushing Ceres between its body and concrete. She gasped, ribs breaking, and lost her grip. Omega-7 turned and grabbed her by the throat. "Inferior model," it said clinically, and began to squeeze. Blade threw his sword. The blade spun through the air and embedded itself in Omega-7's shoulder, cutting through muscle and bone. The clone's grip loosened fractionally. Ceres tore free, coughing, bleeding from her mouth. "We can't kill it," she shouted. "It regenerates from everything." "Then we don't kill it," Blade said, an idea forming. "We contain it." He ran toward the center of the laboratory where other tanks stood in various states of use. Omega-7 pursued, exactly as he'd intended. Blade grabbed a heavy wrench from a maintenance cart and swung it into the support struts of the nearest tank. The structure groaned, tilted. "Ceres! Structural support, 3 o'clock." She understood immediately, firing her Harkonnen at the indicated position. The round detonated, destroying a critical load-bearing pillar. The tank collapsed, thousands of gallons of suspension fluid flooding the laboratory floor. Omega-7 stopped, ankle-deep in the red liquid, recalculating. Blade used that half-second of hesitation to close distance and drive 3 silver stakes into the clone's joints. Shoulder, hip, knee. Not to kill, but to immobilize. Then he activated every UV grenade he had left, throwing them in a circle around Omega-7. The explosion of artificial sunlight was blinding even through his protective glasses. Omega-7 screamed, flesh burning, regeneration struggling to keep pace with continuous UV exposure. Blade didn't give it a chance to adapt. He tackled the clone, driving it down into the suspension fluid, and held it under. "Alucard," he shouted. "The tanks! Fill one with this fluid and seal it." The ancient vampire moved with supernatural speed, tearing open an empty development tank and positioning it beside the pool of suspension fluid. Blade wrestled Omega-7 toward it, the clone thrashing with inhuman strength, nearly breaking his grip a dozen times. Ceres added her strength, grabbing Omega-7's legs. Together, they forced the clone into the empty tank. Alucard sealed it with metal plates torn from the walls, welding them shut with some application of supernatural power that Blade didn't understand and didn't question. Inside the tank, Omega-7 pounded against the metal with fists that dented but didn't breach. Its face, Blade's face, contorted with rage and frustrated programming. "That won't hold it forever," Ceres panted, bleeding from multiple wounds. "Doesn't need to be forever," Blade said. "Just long enough to get it back to Hellsing for study." He keyed his radio. "Hunter 1 to command. Primary target secured. Requesting immediate extraction and hazmat containment transport." Integra's voice crackled back, tense. "Status of the facility? Compromised but operational. Millennium has at least 46 more hybrids in development at other locations. Primary command is in London, not Dover." Repeat. "The Major's in London." Silence on the other end. Then, "Understood. Extraction en route. Time to target. 12 minutes. Can you hold position?" Blade looked around the destroyed laboratory, at the bodies of Millennium soldiers Alucard had slaughtered, at the computers still running their genetic programming sequences. "Negative. Facility is going loud. We need to purge the data and destroy development capability before Millennium can salvage the research." "Then burn it," Integra commanded. "Burn it all." Alucard's grin returned. "Now that is an order I can enthusiastically support." They worked with brutal efficiency. Blade downloaded what data he could from the computer systems onto portable drives, genetic sequences, development protocols, anything that might help counter the hybrids Millennium had already created. So Ceres planted demolition charges on structural supports and around the remaining development tanks. Alucard simply began destroying things with gleeful abandon, smashing equipment and shredding research documents with clawed hands. The facility's automated defenses finally activated, automated turrets, gas releases, electromagnetic barriers. Too little, too late. Alucard absorbed the weapon's fire, Ceres's vampire physiology resisted the gas, and Blade simply endured through gritted teeth and diminishing serum reserves. They fought their way back to the surface, dragging the sealed tank containing Omega-7 through corridors rapidly filling with smoke and chemical fires. Behind them, the laboratory complex collapsed floor by floor as Ceres's demolition charges detonated in sequence. The Hellsing soldiers were waiting with the transport, with weapons ready, providing covering fire as Blade's team emerged from the warehouse. They loaded Omega-7's containment into a specialized hazmat truck, then piled into the armored transport as Dover's port district lit up with secondary explosions. "Go, go, go!" Simmons shouted, and the convoy peeled out, racing through pre-dawn streets while behind them, Warehouse Complex 7 burned with enough intensity to be visible for miles. Blade collapsed in the transport's bench seat, every muscle screaming, ribs grinding with each breath. Ceres slumped beside him, her vampire healing already knitting broken bones but exhaustion evident in her eyes. Alucard stood by the rear door, watching the fire with what looked like genuine admiration. "Well," the ancient vampire said, "that was moderately entertaining. Though I must say, Daywalker, your clone had none of your charm. All violence, no poetry. Quite disappointing, really." "It was a weapon," Blade said through gritted teeth. "That's what Millennium does. They take something human and strip out everything that makes it human." "Unlike you," Alucard observed, "who stripped out your own humanity voluntarily. Tell me, which is more tragic, never having a soul or having one and choosing to suppress it?" Blade was too tired to rise to the bait. He injected another dose of serum, his last, and felt the familiar relief chase away the creeping hunger. But it was weaker this time. His tolerance was building, or his biology was changing, or Omega-7's observation had been right, and he was simply running out of time. "Hunter 1 to command," he said into his radio. "Dover operation complete. Primary facility destroyed. I've acquired intelligence on Millennium's London operation. How did the diversions go?" Integra's voice came back grim. "Manchester team encountered heavy resistance. 4 wounded, 1 KIA. Edinburgh team found only automated defenses, likely a decoy facility. London team..." She paused. "London team discovered something. Prepare for emergency briefing upon return." Blade exchanged glances with Ceres. "What did they find?" "Not over radio," Integra said. "But Mr. Blade, the war you were trying to prevent, it's already begun. Millennium's been seeding hybrid vampires throughout London for the past week. We just didn't know what we were looking for until we had your genetic profile to compare against." Blade's blood ran cold. "How many?" "Unknown. Dozens at minimum. Possibly hundreds." Integra's voice carried the weight of catastrophic realization. "They've been infiltrating the city while we focused on finding their base. The invasion isn't coming, Mr. Blade. It's already here." The transport raced through the English countryside as dawn broke over the horizon. A new day, but not a safe one. Somewhere above London, the Major sat in his flying fortress, watching his plan unfold. Somewhere in the city's shadows, hybrid vampires walked in daylight, indistinguishable from humans until they received activation orders. And in a sealed tank in the hazmat truck, Omega-7 stared with Blade's eyes, waiting with programmed patience for the moment it would be freed to fulfill its purpose. Blade checked his weapons, his ammunition, his nearly depleted serum supply, and I felt the thirst lurking at the edges of his consciousness, held back by chemistry and willpower and nothing else. "How many doses of serum can Hellsing synthesize?" he asked Ceres. "I don't know," she admitted. "Walter might be able to replicate it, but it would take time. Time we don't have." Blade nodded slowly. He'd known this moment would come eventually. The moment when the serum ran out and he had to face what he truly was. He just hoped it wouldn't come in the middle of a war against vampire Nazis using his genetics to create an army. The universe had a sick sense of humor. "Then we work with what we have," he said, "and we end this before Millennium can deploy their full force." Alucard laughed from his position by the door. "Oh, Daywalker, you still think we can win this?" And how delightfully optimistic. His eyes glowed in the growing light. "But consider this. The Major has been planning this war for 60 years. He's anticipated every move, prepared for every counter. Do you truly believe we can stop him with improvisation and righteous fury?" "Yes," Blade said simply. "Why?" "Because he's playing by rules, strategy, tactics, grand gestures. But I've never played by rules." Blade met Alucard's gaze. "I'm just a hunter, and I'm very good at killing monsters." The ancient vampire's grin widened until it was no longer remotely human. "Then perhaps there's hope for us yet." The transport roared toward London, toward the coming storm, toward a war that would test every alliance, shatter every certainty, and force Blade to confront the truth Omega-7 had spoken, that he was both weapon and wielder. Monster and hunter, and the line between them had always been thinner than he'd wanted to admit. Behind them, Dover burned. Ahead, London waited with nightmare patience, and the thirst, always the thirst, whispered promises of power if only he'd stop fighting and accept what he truly was. Hellsing Manor felt different when they returned, like a fortress preparing for siege. Soldiers moved with urgent precision, establishing defensive positions and checking ammunition supplies. Walter coordinated logistics with the calm efficiency of someone who'd prepared for war his entire life. And in her office, Inigra Hellsing stared at a map of London covered in red markers, each one representing a confirmed or suspected hybrid vampire sighting. There were too many to count. Blade stood before the map, still wearing his blood-stained coat, feeling exhaustion in every cell. Saris was beside him, wounds healed but eyes hollow with the weight of what they'd discovered. Alucard lounged against the wall, for once not smiling. "Manchester team's intelligence confirmed it," Inigra said, pointing to the map. "Millennium has been infiltrating London for weeks, possibly months. Hybrid vampires disguised as normal citizens, living normal lives, waiting for activation. They work during the day, walk in sunlight, show no traditional vampire signatures. We only identified them because our soldiers captured one during the diversionary raid, and Walter analyzed its genetic markers against the data you recovered from Dover." "How did we miss this?" Saris asked, voice hollow. "Because they're perfect infiltrators," Walter said, entering with a tablet displaying genetic sequences. "Mister, when Blade's biology allows for complete daylight operation and minimal blood dependency, Millennium's artificial vampire strain eliminates most psychological tells. Combined, they've created sleeper agents indistinguishable from human until activated." He pulled up a new image, a young woman in business attire, smiling at the camera. Sarah Mitchell, accountant, lived in London for 3 months. Millennium hybrid, activated during our Manchester raid and killed 4 civilians before our team destroyed her. Blade's hands clenched. His genetics, his curse, weaponized to create perfect predators. "The Major's endgame is becoming clear," Inigra continued. "He doesn't want to conquer London. He wants to destroy the concept of safety itself. Imagine it. Hundreds of seemingly normal citizens suddenly revealed as vampires, attacking simultaneously across the city. Daylight won't stop them. Holy symbols won't deter them. Silver will work, but how do you arm an entire population against an enemy that looks exactly like them?" "Mass panic," Blade said quietly. "Paranoia. Everyone suspects everyone. Society collapses from within." "Precisely. And once London falls into chaos, the Major broadcasts it globally, shows the world that their governments, their organizations, their heroes can't protect them from monsters that hide in plain sight." Inigra's jaw tightened. "It's psychological warfare on a scale we've never faced." "So we stop him," Sarah said with forced confidence. "We find the Major Zeppelin, board it, kill him and his command staff. Without leadership, the hybrids lose coordination." "Alucard's memories from the doctor suggest otherwise," Inigra replied. Each hybrid has been programmed with mission parameters. Kill the Major, and they'll simply continue their assignments autonomously. We'd need to eliminate every single infiltrator to prevent the attack. How many are we talking? Blade asked. Walter's expression was grim. Conservative estimate based on Millennium's resource capacity and timeline? 300 hybrids. Optimistic estimate? Half that. Worst case? He paused. 1,000 or more if they've been running this operation longer than we believe. The room fell silent. 300 hybrid vampires with Blade's abilities, Millennium's loyalty programming, and activation protocols already in place. It was an army that couldn't be stopped by conventional means and hidden in a city of 8 million people. There has to be a way to identify them, Blade said. Some tell, some signature. They're using my genetics. That means they have vampire markers I carry. There must be something. We're working on it, Walter said. But developing a reliable test and screening 8 million people before the Major activates his forces? The logistics alone are impossible. Then we don't screen everyone, Blade said, mind working through tactical permutations. We draw them out, force activation on our terms, in a location we control, with overwhelming force ready to respond. Alucard finally spoke, his voice devoid of its usual mockery. You're suggesting we deliberately trigger the attack. I'm suggesting we make the Major think he's triggering it, Blade corrected. He's been planning this for 60 years. Well, he's patient. He'll wait for the perfect moment, maximum casualties, maximum psychological impact. But if we make him think we're about to expose his network, force his hand before he's ready, he attacks prematurely, Integra finished, seeing the logic. With incomplete coordination in a scenario where we've prepared countermeasures. It's risky, Walter observed. If we miscalculate, we could cause the very catastrophe we're trying to prevent. We're going to get that catastrophe anyway, Blade said flatly. The Major's been planning this too long, invested too much. He's not going to just give up because we destroyed one facility. But we can choose the battlefield. Choose the timing, make him react to us instead of executing his perfect plan. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. How do we force his hand? Blade pulled out the data drives he'd recovered from Dover. These contain Millennium's hybrid development protocols. Everything they learned from my genetics, every refinement of their process. We announce publicly that we're releasing this information to the global community. Governments, research institutions, rival organizations. Make it clear that in 24 hours, every intelligence agency on Earth will have the tools to identify Millennium's hybrids. The Major won't allow that, Alucard said, understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. He'll have to attack before we can distribute the data. But he'll know it's a trap. And he'll attack anyway, Blade said, because he's an artist. He doesn't want a tactical victory. He wants his grand masterpiece. We're offering him the chance to perform on the world stage, with every eye watching. He won't be able to resist. Integra studied Blade with calculating intensity. You understand him, the Major's psychology. I understand zealots, Blade replied. I've been hunting them my whole life. The Major believes in war as ideology, as expression, as truth. He's not fighting for territory or resources. He's fighting because the fight itself is the point. Give him an audience and a grand stage, and he'll perform even if he knows the ending isn't guaranteed. Integra pulled out a cigar, lit it, and exhaled smoke with deliberate slowness. This plan has approximately 1,000 ways to catastrophically fail. But you're right. Doing nothing guarantees the Major chooses when and where to strike. When we lose the initiative entirely. She turned to Walter. How long to prepare defensive positions throughout London? Somewhere we can concentrate civilian evacuation and establish kill zones for when the hybrids activate? The Tower of London, Walter said immediately. Historic fortress, modern security infrastructure, and symbolic significance the Major won't ignore. We evacuate civilians to protected zones, establish Hellsing forces with support from military and Iscariot, if they'll cooperate, and create a perimeter designed to contain supernatural threats. Iscariot won't cooperate, Alucard said. Anderson will see this as Protestant failure and Catholic opportunity. Maxwell will use the chaos to position the Vatican as humanity's true defender. Then we make them cooperate, Integra said. I'll contact Maxwell personally. You'll offer him a choice. Work with us to stop Millennium, or watch London burn while the world remembers the Vatican did nothing." She stubbed out her cigar with decisive violence. "Walter, begin preparations. Coordinate with military command. Tell them we're running a counter-terrorism exercise. Alucard, I need you to locate the Major's Zeppelin. Use the doctor's memories. Find it, but don't engage. Not yet." "And me?" Blade asked. Inigra met his gaze. "You're the bait, Mr. Blade. The Major wants you, the original template, the living proof that his hybrids are just copies. We announce that you'll be at the tower, publicly presenting the research data. Make it personal. Make it a challenge he can't ignore." "He'll send everything he has," Blade said. "Yes," Inigra agreed, "which is exactly what we need. All his pieces on the board at once, where we can see them, where we can fight them." She stood every inch the commander who'd inherited centuries of responsibility. "This operation commences in 18 hours. We're calling it Operation Endgame, because one way or another, tomorrow night ends Millennium's war." The next 18 hours were controlled chaos. Blade spent them in Hellsing's armory, working with Walter to maximize his limited resources. They couldn't synthesize more serum, not with the time available, but they could arm him with every weapon that might work against hybrid vampires. Silver ammunition by the thousands, UV flashbangs, blessed weapons courtesy of contacts Walter had cultivated over decades. And something special, a sword reforged from silver and steel that had been blessed by 3 different religious traditions. Not holy enough to burn Blade's half-vampire nature, but sanctified enough to do serious damage to the unholy. "You know you might not survive this," Walter said quietly as he helped Blade load equipment. "I know. And you're going anyway." "They're using my curse to create monsters," Blade said, checking the sword's balance. "That makes it my responsibility. Besides," he gave a grim smile, "I've been living on borrowed time since I was born. Might as well make the ending count." Walter studied him with something approaching respect. "Sir Integra chose well when she accepted your alliance. You're nothing like Alucard, but you share his conviction. That's worth more than power." Blade didn't respond. He just continued preparing, methodically checking every weapon, every piece of equipment, which, knowing that tomorrow night would test everything he'd become. Saris found him as midnight approached. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Don't need much sleep," Blade said. "Vampire metabolism." "Yeah." Sarah sat beside him in the armory, both of them surrounded by implements of destruction. "I've been thinking about what you said, about fighting our nature every day, about being one mistake away from becoming what we hunt. And I think maybe that's not weakness, maybe that's strength." She looked at her hands, as still human-looking, but capable of crushing steel. Omega-7 didn't struggle, didn't question. It was just a weapon, perfect and soulless. But we struggle, we question. We choose every single day to be more than our nature demands. Isn't that what makes us human? Not what we are, but what we choose? Blade was quiet for a long moment. "In my world, I spent 43 years believing vampires were irredeemable, that the only good vampire was a destroyed vampire. Then I came here and met you, met Alucard, and I saw..." He struggled with words. "I saw that maybe the curse doesn't define the cursed, that maybe redemption isn't about changing what you are, but about choosing what you do with it. Does that mean you won't try to kill Alucard when this is over?" Saris asked with a slight smile. "Let's survive tomorrow before worrying about the day after," Blade replied. They sat in comfortable silence. 2 monsters who'd chosen humanity, preparing for a war against monsters who'd chosen otherwise. Dawn came too quickly. Blade stood on the Tower of London's battlements, when watching the sun rise over a city that didn't know how close it was to annihilation. Behind him, Hellsing forces established positions. Below, civilians were being quietly evacuated under the guise of security concerns. And somewhere in the brightening sky, the Major's Zeppelin waited, cloaked and patient. Inigra's voice crackled through his earpiece. "All teams in position. Iscariot has agreed to provide support. Anderson and his paladins will hold the northern approach. Military has established outer perimeter. We're as ready as we'll ever be." "And the announcement?" Blade asked. "Broadcasting now. Every intelligence network, every major media outlet. In 30 minutes, the world will know that Hellsing possesses the means to identify Millennium's hybrid infiltrators, and that you'll be presenting that data publicly from the Tower of London at sunset. Blade felt it then, a shift in the air pressure, a change in the city's rhythm. Somewhere, hundreds of hybrid vampires received their activation orders. Somewhere, the Major smiled and gave the command he'd been anticipating for 60 years. The war was beginning. "Master," Alucard's voice came through communications, unusually serious. "I've located the Zeppelin. It's descending. ETA to London airspace, 4 hours. The Major's bringing everything, his command staff, his reserves, his grand finale. Then we'll be ready," Integra said. "All teams, final weapons check. This is not a drill. This is not an exercise. Today we end Millennium's threat, or we die trying. Hellsing expects every soldier to do their duty." Blade drew his reforged sword, felt its weight, its balance, its sanctified edge promising destruction to the unholy. He thought about his mother, dying to give him life, about every vampire he'd destroyed over 27 years, about Omega-7, wearing his face and mocking his choices, about Seras, struggling daily with her nature, about Alucard, ancient and terrible, and leashed by something that might actually be loyalty. He thought about what it meant to be a monster who chose to protect instead of prey. And as the sun climbed higher, casting London in golden light that hybrid vampires would walk through without burning, Blade prepared to face an army of his own curse made manifest. The endgame was here. The sun set over London like blood draining from the sky. Blade stood at the tower's highest point. We're visible to anyone watching, and the Major was definitely watching. Around him, Hellsing's forces held position with weapons ready and nerves stretched tight. Seras commanded the eastern approach, her Harkonnen loaded and ready. Anderson and his Iscariot paladins held the north, blessed bayonets gleaming. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, Alucard waited with predatory patience. The hybrids came with the twilight. They emerged from the crowds of evacuating civilians, shedding their human disguises like snakes shedding skin. Businessmen, students, mothers with children, all revealing the truth. Glowing eyes, inhuman speed, and Blade's curse perfected into weapons without conscience. Hundreds of them, moving with coordinated precision toward the tower. The battle that followed would be remembered as the Night of Hunters, when monsters fought monsters while humanity watched in horror and awe. Blade descended from the battlements into hell. He moved through hybrid vampires with decades of killing instinct, his reforged sword singing its sanctified song through undead flesh. They were fast, strong, and trained, but Blade had something they lacked: the experience of fighting himself, learned in Dover's laboratory. He knew how the hybrids would move because he knew how he would move, and he exploited every predictable pattern with lethal precision. Silver rounds found hearts. UV grenades burned flesh. The blessed sword carved through regenerating tissue and left wounds that wouldn't close. But there were so many, and Blade's serum had run out hours ago. The thirst clawed at his discipline with every drop of blood spilled, whispering promises of power if he'd just give in. Just feed, just accept what he was. He refused. He always refused. Seras fought with the desperate ferocity of someone protecting more than just lives. She was protecting the choice she'd made to remain human despite her nature. Her Harkonnen roared its defiance, and when ammunition ran dry, she fought with strength and speed that matched the hybrids but surpassed them in sheer determination. Anderson's paladins sang hymns as they killed, their blessed bayonets proving that faith, whatever its form, could wound what science created. The zealous priest fought with the same conviction he'd shown in the archives. Except this time, Blade and Anderson fought as reluctant allies against a common enemy. And Alucard? On Alucard was death itself, tearing through Millennium forces with artistic brutality, laughing as he demonstrated why legends fear to speak his true name. The Zeppelin descended through clouds like a mechanical moon, and from its belly poured the Major's final gambit. Not just hybrid vampires, but his original forces, his veteran artificial vampires, his command staff, and at the center of it all, the captain himself. The werewolf moved through the battlefield with precognitive grace, and when he reached Blade, their confrontation was inevitable. They fought on the tower's walls while London burned below, two supernatural warriors representing different philosophies of power. The captain fought for ideology, Blade fought for responsibility. In the end, responsibility won. Blade's sword found the captain's heart, a blessed silver burning through werewolf regeneration, and as the Nazi warrior fell, he smiled, as if finally released from duty he'd never chosen. The Major watched from his command deck as his perfect plan unraveled, not because Hellsing was stronger, but because Blade had been right. When forced to improvise, when stripped of his grand design, the Major's forces couldn't adapt. They were weapons, perfect in program, but Blade and his allies were something more. They were monsters who'd chosen to be heroes, and that choice made all the difference. Integra gave the final order. Alucard, unleashed from all restraint, ascended to the Zeppelin like nightmare-given wings. What he did there, Blade never fully learned. He only saw the explosion, the Zeppelin breaking apart, and the Major's dream of eternal war falling burning from the sky. And by dawn it was over. The tower stood, scarred but intact. The hybrid vampires were destroyed or captured. Millennium's command structure was eliminated, and Blade stood among the survivors, exhausted, wounded, and victorious. But victory came with costs. Hellsing had lost 30 soldiers, Iscariot had lost more, and London would bear the scars of this night for generations. The night when monsters walked openly and the illusion of safety shattered completely. Integra found Blade in the aftermath. Both of them surveyed the damage. The dimensional breach technology was on the Zeppelin, she said quietly, destroyed in Alucard's assault. I'm sorry, Mr. Blade. Your way home burned with Millennium's dreams. Blade nodded slowly. He'd expected this, hoped otherwise, but expected this. Then I guess I'm staying. As what? A Hellsing operative? An independent hunter? An exile from your own reality? Blade looked at Siras, helping wounded soldiers with gentle hands, despite her vampiric nature. Looked at Anderson, quietly praying over the fallen. Looked at Alucard, returned to his leash and somehow seeming content with it. As someone who knows that monsters aren't defined by what they are, Blade said finally, but by what they choose. I spent 43 years believing one truth. This world taught me another. Maybe it's time I learned it properly. Integra offered her hand. Then welcome to Hellsing, Mr. Blade, officially. He took it, an alliance forged in blood and battle, between a vampire hunter and an organization that employed the very things he'd sworn to destroy. It shouldn't have worked. By every rule he'd lived by, it was impossible. But Blade had learned that sometimes the impossible was just the difficult waiting to be attempted. Weeks later, Blade stood in Hellsing's laboratory, working with Walter to synthesize a stable serum supply. They'd never found all the hybrids. Some had escaped, fled into the world, carrying his curse to unknown destinations. But they'd stopped the invasion, stopped the war, and proven that even weapons could choose their targets. Siras visited during her night shifts, and they talked about the burden of being both predator and protector. Anderson sent a letter acknowledging Blade as a temporarily tolerable abomination, which was probably as close to respect as the Zealot could manage. And Alucard? Alucard simply grinned and said he looked forward to their inevitable future confrontation. Because wasn't that what made existence interesting? Blade still dreamed of his mother sometimes, still felt the thirst lurking beneath every moment of calm, still questioned whether he was hero or monster, savior or weapon. But he'd found something in this strange world, not acceptance, but understanding. Understanding that the line between monster and protector wasn't drawn by nature, but by choice. And every day he chose, London rebuilt, Hellsing adapted, and somewhere in the darkness, new threats were already stirring. Because evil never truly died, it just waited for the next opportunity. But so did hunters, and Blade had eternity to perfect his craft. He was the daywalker, the hybrid, the monster who hunted monsters. And in a world where gods walked as heroes and darkness lurked in every shadow, he'd found his place. Not by denying what he was, but by choosing what to do with it. The serum kept the thirst at bay, the sword stayed sharp, and in Hellsing Manor, A vampire hunter learned to work alongside vampires, proving that redemption wasn't about changing your nature, it was about mastering it. Some motherfuckers would always try to ice skate uphill, but Blade had learned that sometimes the impossible slope was worth climbing, one bloody step at a time. London's darkness held new meaning now, not as a hunting ground, but as home. Strange, dangerous, and full of monsters, but also full of those who chose to fight them. And in the end, that choice was everything.